Too shocked by the sudden invitation, Yennecar flushed, stammering as she asked again, while Ed could only think that he had no other way to explain it. He simply wanted to get Yennecar safely out of the building, to a dry place that wasn't too far away, just in case of trouble. Despite her confusion, Yennecar jumped up and hesitantly accepted Ed's proposal. Yennecar quickly said goodbye and ran off into the pouring rain, leaving Ed standing stunned and alone. Ed could only sigh as he watched her retreating figure. He mused that this rain would only cease on the first day of the semester, when the sky turned clear again, and the forest began to carry the scent of autumn. Sitting alone on his porch, Ed realized the long, drawn-out vacation was about to end. In another academy building at 9 in the evening, someone else was also contemplating the need for more training. That was Ziggs Eifelstein, pushing himself to exhaustion during a training session and blaming himself for letting his temper upset Elka. He gently placed his feet on the floor after finishing his practice. Suddenly, a strange noise made Ziggs turn and look toward the door. At the same time, a hooded figure was rushing across the campus grounds in the torrential rain. Willane's determined face was revealed beneath the hood. Inside the building, Willane stopped a maid and asked about the whereabouts of the others. The maid revealed that the head maid, who had been bribed by Lortel, had summoned everyone to the meeting room to lock them in. She then led Willane down the corridor and informed him that the item he requested was ready. She placed a metal bucket on the floor. Willane thanked her and told her to leave it there. Now Willane stood alone at the top of the grand staircase. Everything was in place. Outside, the magnificent Ophelis Hall stood imposing in the darkness. The occupation of Ophelis Hall began as the crowd of students led by Willane gathered at the entrance. They roared in anger and began to surge toward the building. The students shouted in unison, declaring that they would no longer tolerate this unfair treatment and demanding equal academic rights. Willane, acting as the representative for the underperforming students, raised his fist and yelled, demanding that the administration meet their demands. Under the heavy rain, the student mob roared and charged toward Ophelis Hall. Suddenly, the massive, heavy gate groaned and slowly swung open. The students, who had been burning with fervor, were stunned by the unbelievable sight. A shout rang out, urging everyone to rush in and seize the building, now that the door was wide open. Willane turned around, stammering his thanks to the mysterious ally Lortel had sent. He froze when he realized that person was none other than Ed Rothstaler. Before Willane could react, Ed quickly used a cloth bag to cover his mouth. Ed launched into an impassioned speech, declaring that he fully supported their ideals after having been expelled from the building himself. Moved by Ed's words, Willane's hands trembled with emotion. He silently chastised himself for judging Ed unfairly, now believing Ed to be a good person and their benefactor. Ed pushed Willane forward, praising him verbally while internally framing him as the sole scapegoat for the riot. He coldly accepted the fact that Willane had to bear all the blame, a necessary sacrifice. Ed recalled the image of a maid trying to run and report the situation, but he knew her efforts were futile. Head maid Elris, who held the highest authority and controlled the magical barriers, had been bribed by Lortel. The spells originally meant to protect the students were now activated to imprison them within their own rooms. Standing on the staircase, Ed calmly observed everything, assuring himself that it was all proceeding exactly according to plan. He thought about the true mastermind behind everything. And just then, a voice rang out, commenting that things seemed grander than anticipated. The sound of shoes tapping on the damp floor. The person asserted that everything was within their calculations. Lortel Cahellan stepped out of the shadows, smiling triumphantly and saying she knew she could trust Ed. Lortel and Ed descended the stairs. She urged him to act quickly before Academy staff intervened, and Ed simply wished her luck. Suddenly, Lortel stopped, called Ed's name, and warned him that she was about to ask a strange question. Turning her back to him, she unexpectedly asked if Ed had ever taken a life. Ed fell silent, his face obscured by shadow as he considered his answer. He replied decisively with a single word, no. Lortel let out a small, relieved laugh, confessing that she hadn't either. But then she revealed, recalling a miserable past, that she had to do things nearly as terrible just to survive as a hunted child. To survive, she ruined the lives of others, coldly burned away their hope, and struck first to avoid betrayal. Her narrative conjured an image of her walking atop a mountain of gold coins, beneath which lay the countless desperate hands of her victims, a path that earned her the title, the Golden Daughter. Returning to reality, Lortel admitted to herself that she knew she deserved no one's pity. She turned to look at Ed, seemingly searching for something in him. Lortel asked directly if he could pity someone like her, but deep down, she wasn't seeking sympathy for herself, but for those who shared her fate. Amidst the sound of rain outside the window, a thought echoed that loneliness spares no one, whether good or evil. Ed mused, realizing that to escape loneliness, One must find kindred spirits in the same dark mire to achieve salvation. Lortel answered her own question with a cold no. With flashing eyes, Ed stated that Lortel must take responsibility for her own actions, and he was not the one who could grant her that salvation. Both stood silent in the desolate great hall, an invisible yet palpable distance separating them on the steps. Lortel broke the silence with a smile, apologizing for asking a question that was unlike her. Then she turned away, confidently declaring that she would begin her part, as time was running short. After Lortel left, Ed Rothstaler quietly stepped into Ophelis Hall. He tiredly slumped onto a chair, letting out a heavy sigh. Ed closed his eyes, visualizing the plan. Lortel would discuss the next phase with Elris. They would worsen the situation by overloading the defensive magic circles within the building. Afterward, the detonator would be handed over to Willan, the representative of the weaker students. Willain, after absorbing all the magical power from the countless magic circles, would become the boss of the fourth floor. Ed stretched, knowing that the key to this battle was defeating Willain as quickly as possible, and his current task was simply to wait for Taylor to charge in. He would hold them back for a while before allowing Taylor to win and proceed upstairs. Sitting alone on the grand staircase, Ed accepted that he would likely sustain some injuries, but it was a necessary sacrifice. Meanwhile, in the rose garden, the night rain enveloped the scenery. The clatter of hooves echoed as a carriage approached, making Yennecar Polarover wonder if an important figure had arrived, and if she should leave. She looked at the note Ed had left, knowing he was unaware of the carriage. He had only messaged that he had an urgent matter and would be late. Yennecar's heart pounded as she blushed, wondering if Ed was preparing something special for her. The splendid carriage was no longer important. The girl resolved not to leave the rose garden, despite having lost sleep for the past 3 days imagining their meeting. Although she felt guilty, Yennecar continuously sought news about Ed through the spirit Marilda. She knew that not only Lucy, but also Princess Penia, Belle Maya, and even Lortel had been seen leaving Ed's campsite. The fact that most of them were girls made her spirits even more anxious and uneasy. And so, the girl decided she would wait, no matter how long it took. Yennecar unconsciously reached up to touch the rose-shaped hair clip, thinking that a butterfly daisy would have been more suitable. Amidst the rainy night, Yennecar sadly looked at the hair clip, her heart heavy with thought. She decided she would quickly go upstairs to change her hair clip, and then return to wait. Deciding instantly, the young girl rushed across the campus grounds, heading straight for the Ophelis building. Meanwhile, another group of 3 had also arrived in front of the building, arguing over whether to charge in, as Elvira worried about her expensive medicinal ingredients. Elvira roared angrily, explaining to Taylor that even a minor change was enough to ruin her entire experiment. Taylor frantically begged Isla to intervene, but Isla merely laughed, believing the top student of the alchemy department could handle things herself. He knew well that once Elvira went berserk, the people inside would be the ones in trouble, as she would throw reagents without hesitation. Ignoring the warnings, Elvira grabbed her 2 friends, insisting they had to go to her room on the 4th floor immediately. She declared she would sweep away all obstacles, then delivered a devastating kick, shattering the main door. However, the chaotic scene inside stunned Elvira for a moment. Amidst the ruined hall, a solitary figure sat on the steps, blocking the path. Elvira was astonished to realize it was Ed Rothstaler. Taylor immediately shielded Isla, angrily demanding to know why Ed was there. Elvira remained silent, her sharp gaze sweeping across the scene. She quickly noticed the muddy footprints, indicating that a crowd of students had already surged inside. The furniture in the hall was overturned, and the scene was utterly chaotic. And Ed, with his back to the staircase, sat like an impenetrable gatekeeper. A smile of amusement suddenly appeared on Elvira's lips as she grasped the unexpected situation. She looked directly at Ed and asked if he intended to stop them. With cold eyes, Ed Rothstaler calmly declared that no one was permitted to pass. Elvira Aniston sneered, challenging Ed by suggesting he had no way to stop her. She continued to mock him, belittling Ed as merely a second-year student who only knew a few basic spells. Elvira confidently boasted about her team composition, a talented swordsman, a mage, and herself, a top alchemist, asserting they held the absolute advantage. Taylor McClure lost patience, placing his hand on his sword hilt and demanding Ed immediately explain what was happening upstairs. His only reply was the terrifying silence of Ed, who remained bowed in the shadows. If that was the case, Taylor decided, taking a decisive step forward. He drew his sword and charged straight at Ed, intending to use force to make the opponent speak. Ed swiftly threw an object, forming a blue magical shield to block the attack. However, Taylor easily sliced through the fragile defense with a single sword strike. Elvira watched the shield shatter into pieces. Ed stood up straight, green magical energy gathering in his hand, leading Elvira to internally analyze that it was only basic magic. and the target was definitely Taylor. But immediately afterward, her eyes widened in shock, realizing she had misjudged the situation. Ed raised his arm high, releasing all the accumulated energy. A sharp windblade was fired, with the incantation of the wind slash. The spell did not fly toward Taylor, but instead cleanly severed the thick iron chain of the chandelier hanging above. Taylor looked up, following the attack's trajectory, horrified as he realized Ed's true target. His face paled in the moment he understood the deadly trap he had just walked into. The massive chandelier hanging from the ceiling was now plummeting straight toward his head. Red magic circles suddenly activated throughout the grand hall, causing someone to frantically wonder about the strange noise. Hidden in the corner, Clevius Nortondale trembled in fear, unable to comprehend what was happening outside. Amidst the chaos, Taylor anxiously called out to Isla, but she quickly reassured him that she had only stumbled in surprise. He then turned to check on Elvira, who grit her teeth and replied not to worry about her. However, an unexpected danger suddenly struck, leaving Elvira stunned. An invisible strike ripped through the air, severing a lock of her hair. Stunned, Elvira realized her hair had just been targeted. Stumbling backward, she dropped her satchel, scattering her precious alchemical vials across the floor. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, Elvira muttered that a major conflict must be raging on the upper floors. She gazed up at the wreckage above, where the deafening rumbles still echoed. A bead of sweat traced a path down her cheek, but her eyes hardened with resolve. She glanced down at the vials scattered on the ground, her last remaining resources. Without hesitation, Elvira snatched up a carefully wrapped vial. She whispered the single activation word, "Ignite." Instantly, a violent inferno erupted from the vial. The resulting sea of flames engulfed the hall, clearly illuminating the silhouette of a figure standing upon the ruined upper level. Elvira realized the situation was dire, and the battle was already lost, for Ed Rothstaler had struck with terrifying speed and precision. She inwardly cursed Ziggs for failing to adequately warn her about Ed's true capabilities. Watching Ed Rothstaler stand calmly amidst the inferno, Elvira bitterly conceded that his magical prowess was not the only thing to be feared about him. Amidst the blazing hall, Elvira Aniston looked up at Ed Rothstaler, who stood calmly on the ruined upper floor, the entire battle firmly in his control. Elvira gritted her teeth bitterly, cursing herself because even as the top student in alchemy, she was now facing the fatal flaw of her discipline. That weakness was the complete reliance on magical items and reagents, as alchemists possessed virtually no true combat skills. She regretted the arrogance of a genius that had led her to scorn carrying defensive magical items, unlike the other students. A terrifying thought flashed through Elvira's mind. Ed Rothstaler had anticipated this exact weakness and planned his attack flawlessly. She realized in horror that Ed's sequence of actions, from dropping the chandelier to raising the wall of fire, were all part of a meticulously calculated strategy. The sole objective of that complex plan was the satchel containing all her reagents and items. But she quickly dismissed that speculation, her gaze hardening as she realized Ed's true objective ran even deeper. He was just Ed Rothstaler, yet the composure and raw power radiating from the orb of energy in his hand forced Elvira to be cautious. Refusing to concede, Elvira secretly retrieved her final trump card, a small magic gem hidden in her jacket pocket. She shattered the gem, releasing a winged rabbit light golem and yelling that the fight was far from over. Elvira quickly chanted, imbuing the golem with fire resistance, enhanced strength, and activating its berserk mode. Instantly, the tiny creature transformed into a raging monster, wielding a massive hammer and snarling amidst the sea of flames. Elsewhere, Isla was struggling to use magic to put out a blaze. A stream of magical energy shot from her hand, hurtling directly toward the flames. But instead of extinguishing the fire, her magic seemed to collide with something unseen, resulting in a violent energy explosion. Isla screamed in terror as she was thrown backward by the chaotic energy surge. Just as danger peaked, a dazzling streak of golden light shot through the air. Taylor McClure rushed forward, swinging his sword to intercept the attack and shouting loudly, trying to snap Isla out of her panic. Taylor worried silently. Despite Ayla's extensive knowledge of magic, her practical combat experience was still non-existent. Taylor realized the enemy was intentionally targeting Isla, keeping both of them pinned down and unable to close the distance. From a distance, Isla called out, asking if Taylor could defeat the opponent if he managed to get close. In a different part of the battle, Elvira roared a decisive command with a belligerent smile. Responding to her summons, the golem, now a colossal shadow beast, let out a terrifying roar and lunged forward. The monster soared over the sea of fire, diving straight down to attack Ed Rothstaler. Returning to his own fight, Taylor gritted his teeth in determination, telling himself this wasn't a question of possibility, but necessity. Ed spoke provocatively, showing amusement at Elvira's fighting spirit. Without hesitation, Elvira dashed swiftly through the flames. Ed shouted her name as a violent explosion hurled Elvira backward. She collapsed amidst the crackling embers, her vest visibly scorched. Cornered, Elvira knelt among her vials, smiling and whispering to them as if they were her beloved children. Just as the golem's claws were about to descend, Ed calmly conjured a rose made of green energy in his palm. He unleashed the attack, releasing a powerful stream of green energy toward Elvira. The gale slash tore through the air, narrowly missing the golem and rocketing straight toward its target. Noticing Ed's preparation, Elvira calmly kissed a vial, activating the magic sealed within. Immediately, she hurled the glowing vial toward the incoming attack. Ed confidently declared that her move was too late. The vial shattered in midair, releasing a special reagent formulated from night butterfly flower and arrowhead mushroom. Imbued with a magic release enchantment, the reagent exploded into a brilliant sphere of arcane energy. Its effect was to restrict mana release, and because of this, Isla felt her chaotic magical flow gradually stabilize in her palm. A wave of energy spread throughout the chamber. Its effect was the temporary neutralization of all magically created constructs. The Shadow Golem, a creature born of sorcery, began to disintegrate under the influence of the energy wave. It collapsed onto the floor, its form dissolving into a cloud of black smoke. Elvira triumphantly realized that Ed was now merely a mage stripped of his ability to use magic. She and Isla both shouted, urging Taylor to seize the moment and attack Ed Rothstaler. However, Ed suddenly turned and fled, leaving everyone utterly stunned. With a determined expression, he rushed forward and grabbed the edge of a large table. He used all his strength to flip the table, sending everything flying toward the pursuing Taylor. A large container rolled out, spilling a shimmering golden liquid onto the floor. The liquid immediately ignited from the lingering embers of the battle. An explosion erupted, creating a ferocious wall of fire. Taylor was halted before the raging inferno. Smelling oil, he worried the fire might spread throughout the Ophelis building and endanger everyone inside. Taylor tightened his grip on his sword hilt, confident that his elemental strike could extinguish any fire, whether magical or oil-based. Knowing the reagent's effect was only temporary, he decided he had to end this battle immediately. Realizing something was amiss, Elvira screamed in panic, trying to stop Taylor. She suddenly noticed that all the windows had been opened beforehand to allow the smoke to escape. Moreover, all flammable objects, such as carpets and decorations, had been cleared out beforehand. Mid-charge, Taylor was stunned to realize that even this fire trap was part of Ed Rothstaler's calculated plan. Ed Rothstaler, his back to the fire, revealed that everything was part of his carefully calculated plan. Witnessing the scene, Elvira Aniston screamed in despair, fearing for Taylor's life. Despite his injuries, Ed calmly drew his bow, aiming straight at the charging enemy. Taylor McClure did not flinch. He leaped over the sea of fire, swinging his sword directly at Ed. He was astonished that Ed could use a bow, but remained confident that he could completely block the arrow. However, a flicker of unease flashed in Taylor's eyes as he realized something was amiss. Ed released the bowstring, and a blazing arrow shot forth with terrifying speed. Taylor was stunned as the arrow whizzed past him. Ed's target was not him. The arrow flew straight toward Isla, who stood motionless in terror. Elvira realized Isla was so panicked she couldn't even cast a basic defensive spell. In a moment of desperation, Elvira screamed Ayla's name. A blue energy shield suddenly enveloped the arrow, stopping it just before it hit Isla. Elvira sighed in relief, her hand clutching a magic orb that had just saved her comrade's life. She collapsed to the ground, panting after the narrow intervention. It was the Grasping Claw, a technical magic tool that allowed the user to pull any small object within sight toward themselves. When she examined the arrow, Elvira suddenly froze, her eyes reflecting surprise. She discovered the arrowhead was merely a cloth wrapping. Ed had never intended to harm them. Realizing she had fallen for the trick, Elvira quickly shouted a warning to Taylor, knowing Ed surely had another ace up his sleeve. But it was too late. The deafening clang of metal echoed as Taylor attacked. Ed Rothstaler coldly used his sword to block Taylor's attack, his gaze sharp and resolute. Amidst the chaos, Taylor heard a massive explosion from the second floor, realizing they would perish if they hesitated. The source of the noise was revealed. Clevius Nortondale had just made a terrifying escape from the clutches of the second-floor boss. Back on the first floor, Ed Rothstaler, covered in injuries, finally sighed in relief as the confrontation subsided. Suddenly, Ed unleashed an extremely powerful energy strike, sending Taylor flying backward in a resounding explosion. A thick cloud of smoke and dust enveloped the area after the fierce attack. Elvira Aniston stood frozen, aghast at the sight before her. Leaning against the shattered wall, Ed, covered in blood, looked up, seemingly astonished by the destruction himself. The grand hall was devastated, with display cases burning, prompting someone to exclaim that the situation was absurd. Taylor angrily grabbed Ed's collar, demanding a reason for this insane action. Elvira watched with folded arms, frustrated to realize the entire group had been manipulated by Ed and fought exactly according to his script. She deduced that if Ed truly wanted to stop them, he could have set an ambush instead of waiting openly. Furthermore, throughout the battle, Ed had displayed a veteran fighting style, devoid of any hesitation or inexperience. Taylor, also sensing something was wrong, looked straight at Ed and asked if he was finished. Ed brushed Taylor's hand away and pushed him back, coldly telling him to stop talking and hurry upstairs. Taylor, Elvira, and Isla's group were all stunned, unable to understand why Ed had fought so fiercely just to let them pass. Outside, the rain continued to pour down on the Ophelis building, making the atmosphere even heavier. Ed glanced away when Elvira spoke up, asking why he had held back against them. Taylor turned to ask Elvira what she meant, while Ayla reacted with fury at the suggestion that Ed hadn't used his full strength. Refusing to be ignored, Elvira stepped forward to confront Ed, angrily demanding an answer for his inexplicable leniency. Amidst the tension, Taylor's eyes suddenly flared with a brilliant blue light, his expression becoming unusually resolute. Ayla glared furiously, enraged by the current situation. Suddenly, a creaking sound echoed as a door at the end of the corridor slowly opened. A heavy, shaking sound signaled an approaching presence. Lost in thought, Yennecar recalled the moment she carefully chose the rose hairpin. After much deliberation, she had walked with naive faith, allowing herself to dream of a perfect encounter. But the cruel reality shattered her illusion. The boy she had been waiting for was being attacked by Taylor and Ayla. Ed Rothstaler lay there, exhausted and covered in blood, leaving Yennecar speechless with shock and confusion. Killing intent, radiating, Yennecar stood tall, her red eyes glaring as she fiercely demanded to know what they were doing. She suddenly remembered Ed's letter, her intuition telling her he had run into unexpected trouble. Yennecar recalled the times Ed had demonstrated his capability, from daily life to the battle with Glasscan. In her mind, Ed Rothstaler was the person who always instilled confidence that he could resolve any difficulty. She also realized he was someone who knew how to reflect on himself after being attacked at a weak point. She had promised she would certainly help him when he needed it, but Ed had never sought her out. And then Yennecar realized Ed deliberately pushed her away, fighting until he bled, all to protect her from further disciplinary action after the Glasscan incident. She had been completely unaware, while he secretly arranged everything so she wouldn't be implicated. While she was preoccupied with her attire, he had been facing danger. Magical energy violently erupted as Yennecar stared directly at Taylor's group, repeating her question in a deadly tone. Meanwhile, Taylor also grasped Ed's intention, stating that his act of blocking them must have had a deeper reason. Seeing Taylor waver, Ayla furiously shouted, demanding that he quickly snap out of it. She gritted her teeth, emphasizing that Yennecar was their enemy. Standing amidst the magical maelstrom, Yennecar coldly declared that she had no interest in the objectives of the assault team lying scattered at her feet. Witnessing the scene, the heavily injured Ed struggled to rise, shouting her name in desperation. Yennecar turned back, offering a gentle smile to reassure Ed that everything was fine. Meanwhile, Ayla and Elvira were frozen, stiff, horrified by the immeasurable magical power on display. Suddenly, glowing white feathers began to appear amidst the chaotic energy flow. They shot straight toward the window, shattering the glass pane into countless fragments. Yennecar summoned 4 powerful intermediate spirits, forming a terrifying elemental army, and called out Ed's name. With determined, blazing red eyes, she promised to resolve everything in just 1 minute. Taylor was stunned as he analyzed the situation, realizing Yennecar had summoned an entire spirit army. Ayla and Elvira desperately urged Taylor to retreat, admitting that they could not win, having already been defeated by Ed. Now, their opponent was no longer just an ordinary student. It was Yennecar Palarover, the second-year valedictorian of the magic department. As the spirits charged, Ayla screamed, demanding Taylor face reality and find an escape route through the shattered window. But Taylor hesitated, knowing from Ed that this incident was far more complex than a simple occupation. Determined not to let his comrades' sacrifices be in vain, Taylor unleashed his power, his blazing sword ready for battle. Ayla cried out his name in terror as she watched Taylor charge alone to confront the gigantic spirits, living up to the destiny of a protagonist. Her bloodied hand gripped Taylor's cloak, desperately trying to hold him back. "Go while you still can," Ayla pleaded desperately, wanting him to escape alone. A blinding explosion of golden energy erupted from the fierce confrontation. Ayla looked straight at Taylor with a resolute expression, ordering him to listen, causing him to turn back in surprise. Taylor declared that he would handle Yennecar alone, urging his comrades to proceed to the second floor according to plan. Isla questioned Taylor's sudden decision in astonishment, while he merely urged them coldly to hurry and leave. Elvira Aniston laughed bitterly, mocking that Taylor couldn't possibly do anything in his heavily injured state. To silence her protest, Taylor unexpectedly slapped Elvira on the head, making her cry out in pain. He told Elvira to take his reagents and apologized for tearing her pouch. Completely bewildered by Taylor's actions, Elvira could only grasp the vials. Isla screamed encouragement as the group began to flee from the besieging spirit army. Amidst the flow of dark energy, Yennecar Palarover raised her hand, ready to annihilate those who dared to flee. Her blazing red gaze locked onto her targets, filled with killing intent. But then, her vision suddenly caught sight of the heavily wounded Ed Rothstaler, causing her to gasp his name in shock. Yennecar immediately rushed to Ed's side, gently advising him not to strain himself and promising to take care of everything. Ed realized that the sudden physical contact might be considered rude, but the situation did not allow him to hesitate. He gently placed his hand on Yennecar's shoulder, reassuring her that he was truly fine. With a gentle smile, despite his body being covered in wounds, Ed advised her not to overreact on his behalf. His words and actions caused Yennecar's rage to dissipate, leaving only astonishment in her eyes. The anger was replaced by a face flushed red with confusion and embarrassment. Yennecar stammered upon realizing Ed's hand was resting on her shoulder, but he merely explained that the wind created by her spirits was too strong for him to stand steady. Her wind spirit bowed apologetically as Yennecar realized her foolishness and blamed herself. The magical gust faded as the spirit was dismissed. Invisible fragments fell, signaling that the extreme tension had passed. Taylor, Isla, and Elvira Aniston's team stood dumbfounded, unable to believe that Ed had neutralized Yennecar's terrifying power. With his last ounce of strength, Ed Rothstaler pushed Yennecar Palarover away, urgently imploring her to leave quickly. Ed's consciousness faded. He managed only one final thought before collapsing. Ed fell unconscious, collapsing backward into the residual energy vortex, much to Yennecar's extreme horror. Yennecar's desperate scream echoed as the scene shifted to a clock tower under a torrential night rain. During a conversation, Yennecar scolded Ed for recklessly putting himself in danger, while he promised to tell her everything next time. Yennecar angrily declared that those who had injured Ed had gone too far, and that she would not forgive them. She gently made Ed promise not to get hurt again, and he tiredly agreed, thanking her for her concern. Ed thought to himself that although the plan had slightly changed, he had fulfilled his role as the first-floor boss and could now rest. Just then, Yennecar suddenly mentioned that she had seen a very large carriage in the rose garden. Ed's eyes widened when Yennecar said that the carriage bore a golden crown emblem. Ed's memory surged. The golden crown was the symbol of the powerful Etel store. Its owner was Lortel's adoptive father, the man who murdered her biological father, a false boss whom Lortel herself was destined to overthrow. That person was Elta, the Golden King, a key figure in the later event, the battle for the Sage's sealed relic. Ed realized that Elti's appearance at this moment was a terrifying variable, completely outside his predictions and knowledge. Under the heavy rain, Elti's entourage and luxurious carriage stopped in the academy courtyard. From a high window in Ophelis Hall, a figure silently observed the entire event. That person was Lortel Cahaland, who pressed her hand against the window and told her maid, Elris, that she had just been kicked out. Lortel asked Elris about Ed, whom she described as having a wicked and cruel appearance when they first met. She remarked that she sensed a familiar scent from Elris, and it seemed she had also smelled it on Ed. In a vague flashback, an ash-blonde man wondered if anyone would pity a person who only offered emotional commentary. With glowing blue eyes, he judged that Lortel must bear responsibility for her choices, just as the other person had not hesitated to discard everything. Lortel coldly retorted, asserting that people like her, and Elris, the veteran head maid of the Ophelis dormitory, survived by listening to such harsh words. The flashback showed that Elris had dedicated her entire youth to the dormitory, starting as an apprentice maid at 15 and rising to the position of manager. To sway such an upright person, Lortel knew she needed an enormous sum of money, a ruthless investment to purchase loyalty. Returning to the present, Lortel smiled and told Elris that she was glad to have her there. Elris, who had witnessed countless individuals sell their souls for gold, understood the temptation Lortel was setting forth. Lortel walked across the golden sea of despair, feeling less alone when facing those of her own kind, those consumed by greed. Memories of her harsh childhood flooded back, when young Lortel had to fight for survival in the slums, a place where you either stabbed others or were stabbed yourself. Elris clearly understood Lortel's cruel plan to coordinate with Willen and grant him control over the dormitory's defensive magic formations. Either way, the Ophelis dormitory was certain to be destroyed, and Lortel was the villain orchestrating it all. With a self-satisfied smile, she played the role of a mastermind hidden behind a dark curtain. Lortel explained that she would hide in a storage room, playing the part of a frightened, obedient student completely unaware of the impending rebellion. Elris sighed internally, feeling only pity for such a miserable person. Suddenly, Elris gripped the hilt of her sword and said she had something to tell Miss Lortel. The cold blade pressed against Lortel as Elris asserted that someone like her would never find love or a family to open her heart to. Elris's gaze was sharp, the sword in her hand radiating powerful aura as she pointed it directly at Lortel, emphasizing that Lortel was not like her. Outside, rain continued to pour down on the Ophelis dormitory, signaling that if things continued this way, the curtain would soon fall on the performance. On the second floor, the assault team easily captured the cowardly Clevius, who was supposed to be the floor boss, as he attempted to flee. On the third floor, the maid Kelly, alone without her twin sister Shani's support, was quickly defeated and could only kneel, apologizing for betraying Elris' trust. Without questioning the suspicious absence of one of the twins, Taylor's team proceeded straight to the fourth floor of the Ophelis dormitory, much more easily than anticipated. The truth was, only the first floor boss had been unreasonably difficult, but the moment they stepped onto the fourth floor, a terrifying scream echoed, startling Elvira. A surge of blazing red magical energy erupted, forcing the students to flee in panic to save their lives. At the center of the chaos was Willen, the fourth floor boss, who had been possessed by the dormitory's own defensive magic formations, desperately screaming for help. These formations were originally designed to protect the students from external forces, but now, in the hands of an out-of-control Willen, they had become nothing less than a weapon of destruction. Taylor's team had to strain themselves to fend off the fierce energy attacks. The situation was extremely critical. From the outside, the entire Ophelis dormitory shook violently under the heavy rain. Inside, students began to panic. One female student anxiously wondering what was happening. Another male student screamed in fear that the building could collapse at any moment. The chaos peaked when a student cried out helplessly, unable to understand why the maid squad wasn't intervening. As the window panes began to shatter, the order to evacuate was shouted throughout the corridors. Even the most elite students of the Ophelis dormitory, who usually maintained their composure, now had to use all their strength to break through the walls and escape. A series of explosions followed one another along the building as students created escape routes, worsening the situation. Another terrifying explosion shook the entire structure. Amidst the magical storm, Taylor desperately asked Elvira about the night butterfly flower reagent, but she yelled back that it was completely useless against this type of magic formation. In this life-or-death situation, Elvira pulled out a special reagent vial, declaring it the perfect weapon for confined spaces. She threw the vial, releasing a plume of green smoke, announcing that it would suppress low-level magic in this corridor. Seizing the opportunity, Taylor grabbed the trembling Clevius, asserting that Willen's magic was primarily supportive and not overwhelmingly powerful. Without hesitation, Taylor kicked Clevius and Isla forward, forcing them to charge and defeat Willain amidst desperate screams of protest. At the end of the corridor, Willain, completely possessed by the magic, unleashed all the accumulated power in a torrent of savage energy. Taylor and Ayla shot through the energy storm, dodging the destructive magical currents screaming around them. Willain's face was both tear-streaked and etched with a satisfied smile. His glasses cracked under the strain of his own power. He whispered in relief, as if he had been waiting for this moment of destruction for a long time. Immediately afterward, a terrifying explosion erupted, swallowing everything in blinding light. From the outside, successive explosions ripped through the Ophelis dormitory, blowing the windows outward. Under the heavy rain, Yennecar worried about Ed's injuries as they watched the scene unfold, while a mysterious carriage approached. Ed reassured her that it was not his blood, his eyes still fixed on the unfolding events. He sighed, sensing a troublesome presence that had just appeared amidst the chaos. Ed inwardly remarked that the carriage looked truly modest, a sarcastic comment given its ostentation. He knew that this magnificent appearance was nothing compared to the power of the man sitting inside. The Golden King, Elta, Lortel's adoptive father, had arrived, and this discreet appearance signaled an urgent and dangerous purpose. Ed realized in horror that Elte was a villain who shouldn't have appeared yet. His presence completely shattered the script. As an attendant opened the carriage door, Ed wondered if Elte had deliberately waited for the moment the building was destroyed to reveal himself. Ed's eyes widened in astonishment, unable to believe who was stepping out of the carriage. The person stepping out of the carriage was Shani, Kelly's twin sister and the third-floor boss, one of the orphans taken in by Elris. Ed recognized a serious change in the script. Elris should have been bought off by Lortel, but her appearance alongside Elta was an alarming sign. He formulated the terrifying hypothesis that Elris had betrayed Lortel to side with Elta. If that were true, the only future Ed could foresee was Lortel's complete downfall. Ed was acutely aware of Lortel's crucial role in future events, from the political struggle against Penia to supporting the protagonist. He told himself he couldn't shoulder Lortel's role as well, while Elta and his entourage strode decisively through the pouring rain. Ed turned to call Yennecar, who was standing beside him with a worried look. With a distressed expression, he explained that he had an urgent favor to ask and wasn't sure he could handle it alone, his heart heavy with the difficulty of explaining the situation. To Ed's surprise, Yennecar immediately agreed to help without needing further details. She looked him straight in the eye, resolutely asking what she needed to do. Meanwhile, a letter addressed to Elta Cahelland was smoldering, beginning to reveal a shocking truth. The letter warned Elte that Lortel, his adopted daughter, was plotting betrayal to seize control of the entire company. It exposed the fact that Lortel knew Elte had murdered her parents and was secretly mobilizing other forces to overthrow him. The negotiation for the purchase of the sealed tome was actually a trap designed to lure Elte to the academy, preventing him from interfering with a prearranged incident. The writer asserted that they possessed undeniable evidence of Lortel's conspiracy. They hinted that their loyalty would belong to whoever offered the higher price, be it Lortel or Elta. The writer was revealed to be Elris, who explained that this was her final year as headmaid due to declining health. Elris admitted that her actions could either complicate or simplify matters for Lortel. Attached to the letter was a list of orphanages, implying that the amount of gold sent to these locations would determine her ultimate allegiance. Elris's letter concluded with a wish that Lortel would make a wise decision beneath the torrential rain. Immediately afterward, a sharp blade pressed against Lortel's neck, and a cold voice announced that Master Elte was about to arrive. The threat came from Elris, who expressed surprise at Lortel's shock, sarcastically remarking that she had thought Lortel was more calculating than that. Elris commented that Lortel's revenge plot made her no different from Elte in her eyes. She then sighed, bitterly admitting that perhaps she herself was just like them. Suddenly, a terrifying explosion shook the building, throwing Lortel into a sea of flames. Amidst the wreckage, Willen realized in shock that he couldn't have been the one controlling the magic arrays, and the true mastermind was Elris, whom Taylor's team had just horrifyingly discovered holding Lortel hostage. Elris swung her sword, seemingly attacking Lortel right in front of everyone. Lortel collapsed, and Taylor's group immediately rushed forward to catch her in a panic. Deep down, Lortel formulated her next plan, shifting all the blame onto Elris. Elvira and the others anxiously called Lortel's name, completely unaware of her calculations. Lortel mocked her own pathetic appearance, but her eyes shone with fierce determination. Abruptly, she sprang up and dashed away, leaving behind the frantic cries of her friends. Lortel told herself that Elte was on his way, and this was her moment. She raced down the stairs, determined to contact the executives to overthrow Elta while he was absent. Her plan was to send out the homing pigeons and then go into hiding, as everything now depended on whether she was captured or not. Her feet swiftly carried her down the opulent corridor. Then, Lortel suddenly stopped, concluding her train of thought with an implicit self-admonishment. That's all. Don't be disappointed. Ed Rossdaler coldly thought that no one in this world could truly understand him. Meanwhile, Elris calmly accepted the betrayal, a concept she was all too familiar with. Lortel Cahelland hurried down the corridor, her mind in turmoil. She burst into sobs, telling herself that collapsing now was completely out of character for her. After a brief pause, she regained her composure. Lortel resolved to do whatever was necessary to complete the plan. She rushed forward, determined to reach her room before Elte arrived. Lortel believed that as long as she sent that message, everything would be fine. At the same time, the main hall on the first floor revealed a scene of utter devastation. Elta and his black-cloaked entourage entered, their steps radiating authority. He looked around and ordered the students to evacuate immediately. Elta declared that the building was in danger of collapse and that they were there to seal off the area for safety reasons. Unexpectedly, the heavily injured Ed Rothstaler appeared, blocking their path and declaring that no one was allowed to pass. When Elte questioned him, Ed asserted that he was acting on his personal judgment based on the Academy's safety protocols. Ed secretly analyzed the situation, realizing that three forces were vying for control of the narrative. First was Lortel, who sought to depose Elte to avenge her parents. Next was Elta, who was trying to thwart Lortel's plot and seize the sealed tome. And finally, there was Elris, the unpredictable factor standing between the two sides, who had derailed the entire sequence of events. Ed recalled the scene of Elris holding a sword to Lortel's neck on the 5th floor and wondered whether he should intervene immediately. Ed decided against intervening, believing that, according to the script, Taylor's group would naturally encounter and deal with Elris. He had complete faith in their strength, visualizing the entire team coordinating their combat seamlessly. That confidence stemmed from Ed having personally witnessed and confirmed the abilities of every member of Taylor's group. Now, he determined that the more critical objective was to deal with whatever scheme Elte was planning. With iron resolve, Ed believed that simply stopping Elte would put everything back on its proper trajectory. In reality, Ed bowed to Elte Cahelland and his two cloaked attendants, politely inquiring about the reason for his presence. He subtly suggested that he would contact the academy staff so they could receive Elte with the appropriate dignity and respect. Elte responded briefly, his sharp gaze seemingly seeing right through everything. Staring directly at the blood-soaked Ed, Elte began to state his judgment. Exuding an overwhelming aura of pressure, Elte asserted that Ed was definitely Lortel's subordinate. 10 minutes earlier, a terrifying explosion had shaken the entire building. Ed and Yennecar stood before a shattered wall, witnessing the scene of destruction. Ed spoke up, asking the person who was still inside the ruined room amidst the chaos. From the ceiling, a man with a massive, muscular physique descended, confidently stating that a collapsing building couldn't possibly trouble him. The man complained about the destroyed wall, while Ed was secretly astonished, unable to believe that such a person was a mage. He turned to greet Yennecar, recalling that they had once been on opposing sides, causing her to apologize awkwardly. The man reassured Yennecar that everything was in the past, then glanced at her and Ed with a meaningful look. He abruptly asked them directly if they were dating, making Yennecar jump in surprise. While Yennecar frantically waved her hands in denial, Ed merely stood silent with a completely expressionless face. Yennecar worriedly asked if the rude question had bothered Ed, but he calmly replied that he was fine and that the impolite one was Ziggs. Immediately afterward, Ziggs bowed deeply and formally to apologize for his actions. He looked up, wondering why Ed had to destroy an entire wall just to find him. Ed offered no explanation, his eyes sharpening as he seriously requested Ziggs's help with a task, promising to repay him later. The scene shifted. Ed was now standing in the middle of a ruined hall, facing Elte Cahelland and his cloaked entourage. Elte coldly agreed, but his gaze was locked onto the heavily injured young man. With a resolute expression, Ed did not flinch under the invisible pressure emanating from the powerful man. Elte radiated a terrifying aura, asserting that Ed was definitely Lortel's subordinate. He leaned down, whispering into Ed's ear, mocking him by asking if he was enchanted by Lortel's beauty and advising him to choose immediate profit. Elte warned that Lortel had the nature of a cunning fox, ready to stab anyone in the back at any moment, and that he, as her guardian, understood this better than anyone. To prove his point, Elte made an enticing offer. He would pay Ed double what Lortel had promised and demanded that he step aside. Ed quietly thanked him for the offer, but his tone implied a rejection. He raised his head, his eyes flashing with magical light, and boldly declared that Lortel had promised no gold or silver, so 00 was still 0. Elte narrowed his eyes, realizing that this young man could not be bought with wealth. When words failed, Elte's entire entourage simultaneously unleashed blue magical power and drew their weapons, ready for combat. Ed's gaze was fearless, as he quickly scanned the enemies surrounding him. Elte ordered his subordinates to silently eliminate Ed, and they immediately charged forward. 2 hooded assassins lunged toward Ed, roaring that he would not escape. Just as the blade was about to strike, a surge of green energy suddenly erupted, enveloping one of the attackers. A stranger in a fur-collared coat appeared, using the green energy to shield a white-haired girl with cat ears, and asked Ed about his condition. From another location, Ed urgently shouted, asking his comrades to buy him time so he could check the situation, promising to repay them later. Taylor smiled confidently, standing with Isla amidst a sea of fire, and replied that he was the one indebted to Ed. Witnessing this, Elte coldly remarked that even though they were just students, they could not be underestimated, then ordered his subordinates to attack. Immediately, Taylor and Isla plunged into the fight, confronting the hooded attendants with a massive fireball. Meanwhile, Ed had separated, traversing the ruined corridor alone amidst the explosions. With a bloodied and determined face, he told himself he had to find Lortel to inform her of everything. Suddenly, Ed stopped short when he saw Lortel standing dazed ahead of him. He asked if she was trapped there, and seeing Lortel's confusion, he decisively suggested they both escape through the back door. Ed looked back sternly, demanding that Lortel follow him and not fall behind. While fleeing, Lortel sank into bitter thoughts. The receptionist Sharo was friendly to her, only to extract information for profit. The worker Kadan was cheerful toward her only because of the generous tips. Even the parrot Teeny was fond of her only because she fed it the finest food. Lortel bitterly realized that in her world, all kindness was bought with self-interest. Just then, Ed suddenly asked directly, shattering her train of thought. Elris betrayed you, didn't she? Lortel lowered her head, bitterly admitting it was her fault. A mistake so naive it was foolish. She compared herself to Yennecar, who grew up surrounded by love and treated the world with pure kindness. Lortel recalled the moment she saw the selfless look Yennecar gave Ed. Because she witnessed that pure affection, she deceived herself into believing she could trust someone too, and subsequently revealed all her plans to Elris. In Lortel's mind, the image of Elris standing over her with a sword felt like a judgment, making her bitterly realize that trusting no one was her true survival principle. She stopped abruptly in the dark corridor, realizing she had deceived herself. Looking at her cracked reflection, Lortel chastised herself, realizing she should have remembered that she was inherently tainted and could never become pure. She recalled the 5 people she had bribed. Elris, the twins Shani and Kelly, Willen, and Ed, the fallen noble. Now, she believed that Elris and the 2 maid sisters had defected to LT's side, and Willain would soon betray her to save his own life. Her gaze turned toward Ed, her last remaining ally, and she wondered about his fate. Lortel apologized to Ed, but then questioned why she would say such a thing to an ally. She deliberately pushed him away by saying she couldn't guarantee payment, immediately regretting her foolishness. However, Ed's decisive reply, "I didn't ask," left Lortel completely stunned. Ed suddenly grabbed her wrist, warning that if LT caught her, her life would be over. He decisively pulled her along, declaring that they had to escape first and talk later. Stunned by his resolute action, Lortel's mind echoed with the 2 words, kindness and trust. When Ed demanded an explanation, Lortel sank back into the thought that kindness always came with an ulterior motive. She told herself that if she couldn't discern that purpose, she absolutely shouldn't trust anyone. Nevertheless, while being dragged away, Lortel began to confess her father's market manipulation scheme. She explained that his plan was to purchase all the cheap armor after the monster subjugation event, to monopolize the market through insider trading. Lortel further revealed that to secure capital, her father had sent her to Sylvania to steal the sage's sealed tome. Upon hearing this, Ed responded only with a sharp gaze, asserting that he already knew everything he needed to know. A diagram appeared, illustrating how merchants could collude to trade an item among themselves to artificially inflate its value. When the price of an item continuously rose without external supply, people began to believe its value would soar even higher. That was the moment the merchants would simultaneously sell off their stockpiled goods, reaping enormous profits. However, this strategy required absolute trust, because if a few traders undercut the price early, the entire plan would collapse. This would push Elta, who had poured all his resources into cornering the market, into heavy losses and the risk of losing everything. Lortel revealed that for years, she had secretly bribed dozens of merchants to prepare for this overthrow. While running, Ed exposed her entire plan, causing chaos in the Ophilis dormitory to force the academy to sell the sealed tome cheaply, then using it as bait to lure Elta away from his main headquarters. Lortel was dumbfounded, wondering in astonishment how he could possibly know everything. Ed coldly declared that she now had only one thing left to do. He ordered her to send a message to the main headquarters to sell all the armor, and Lortel stammered, revealing the homing pigeon in her room. She explained that it was a direct communication method. She only needed to send it off and go into hiding to secure the victory. But fear overwhelmed Lortel as she believed her father had anticipated this and would capture her that very night for interrogation. Ed remained silent for a moment, processing the crucial information. Then he looked straight at her, his voice hardening, demanding that she listen carefully. Ed analyzed that Elte must have stationed guards at both bridges leading to Akan Island, blocking all her escape routes. He outlined a diversion plan, having a stable hand drive an empty carriage off the island to mislead Elte's forces. When Lortel anxiously asked about her own safety, Ed revealed a secret cabin in the northern forest and instructed her to hide there for 3 days. Ed decided he would go to her room himself to send the homing pigeon, taking on the most dangerous part of the task. His eyes shone with steely determination. Without a word of warning, Ed gripped Lortel's hand tightly, resolutely pulling her along according to his plan. The heavily injured Ed decisively assigned Lortel her task, assuring her that he would handle the guards outside. Faced with his astonishing efficiency, Lortel felt a powerful surge of belief that she could entrust everything to this man. Noticing Lortel was dazed, Ed sternly reminded her, pulling her back to the harsh reality. Lortel whispered Ed's name in her mind, truly considering for the first time placing her complete trust in another person. Unable to hold back, she looked up and asked him why he was risking his life to save her. Ed silently turned away, seemingly unwilling to face the direct question. He let out a soft groan of pain before curtly replying that there was no reason at all. Yet, just as he opened the door to leave, he added that he simply felt he ought to. The door slammed shut, leaving Lortel alone in the terrifying silence of the room. Outside, the night rain continued to pour relentlessly, washing over the large window pane. Exhausted, Lortel slid down onto the floor, the long-suppressed tension finally breaking. She gasped for breath, trying to regain her composure amidst the pounding echoes in her chest. At first, she mistook it for the sound of the fierce battle between Elris and Taylor's group far away. Then she thought it came from the skirmish on the first floor, where Princess Penia was commanding. But no, the sound was closer than that, unbelievably close. With tear-filled eyes and a flushed face, Lortel realized that the deafening sound was the frantic beating of her own heart. In the dark forest outside, the rain still lashed down. A voice rang out from the downpour, expressing surprise at seeing Ed emerge from that door. The ambusher revealed herself. It was Shani, the dishwashing maid, now brandishing a massive sword while clad in battle armor. Ed muttered that this final obstacle felt somewhat anticlimactic. Nevertheless, he raised his spirits, knowing that this hellish occupation event was finally nearing its conclusion. In his thoughts, Ed recalled the battle with headmaid Elris, who had access to the Ophelis dormitory's defensive magic circles. She possessed swordsmanship comparable to a combat department student, and could even utilize intermediate-level magic. That was headmaid Elris, a formidable opponent. However, no matter how strong she was, she could not defeat Taylor, because Taylor was the protagonist, and that was the final battle against headmaid Elris. Returning to reality, Shani's blade flashed in the rain. The sharp sword reflected the faint light emanating from the building behind her. Shani stood in a ready stance, her eyes gleaming with deadly resolve. She faced Ed, who stood there looking exhausted yet completely composed. Ed told himself that his mana was nearly depleted, only enough to cast basic spells 2 or 3 more times. Shani lunged forward, her body enveloped by a stream of dark energy. She swung her greatsword with astonishing speed. A powerful slash tore through the air, aimed directly at Ed, but he lightly evaded the lightning-fast attack. Shani was stunned to see her strike miss, while Ed had already anticipated her first attack would be a thrust aimed between his lower abdomen and thigh. He stood firm, for he already knew the pattern of her attacks. Ed thought to himself that evading the attack was not due to his reaction speed. Rather, it was because he possessed the precognitive ability, allowing him to grasp every action of his opponent. With a powerful movement, he slammed Shani onto the cold, damp ground. The maid only managed a cry of pain, completely surprised by the sudden counterattack. Ed realized that the glowing purple eyes were the privilege of the star-blessed twins. The skill-sharing ability allowed them to borrow one skill from the other, once per day, and he knew well that the hovering knives were Kelly's low-level object manipulation magic. The stream of magical energy surrounding Ed seemed to have locked onto its target. A barrage of daggers hurtled towards him, guided by the magic. With her brightly glowing purple eyes, Shani smirked triumphantly, believing she had finished off her enemy. But her smile vanished, replaced by extreme astonishment when she saw the attack was nearly harmless. Ed stood firm, his eyes reflecting a cold blue light, clutching the bleeding wound on his bicep. He knew that Shani's magical control was not as refined as Kelly's, so the damage was only a minor scratch. Seizing the opportunity, Ed lunged forward and grabbed Shani's arm while she was still stunned. He twisted her arm forcefully, and a cry of pain erupted as she was completely overwhelmed. With a decisive kick, Ed disarmed Shani of her greatsword, sending it flying away. He looked down at his defeated opponent and coldly stated the situation. Pinned to the ground, Shani screamed in despair, the entire confrontation having ended in less than a minute. Nevertheless, she yelled in indignation that she could not disappoint Elris, and demanded Ed get out of the way. Ed coldly declared that Elris was certain to fail. Pinned down, Shani furiously screamed, questioning what he knew about her mistress. In a fit of rage, she unleashed a stream of purple magical power, shouting about the suffering Elris had endured. Shani stood up, summoning a barrage of lethal energy spheres, preparing for her final attack. She launched a destructive strike, screaming about the countless orphans Elris had taken in and cared for. Faced with her confession that she herself was one of those orphans, Ed simply replied coldly that he did not know. He recalled that in the game, the story of Elris's personal circumstances was never deeply explored. A fleeting image in his mind was of Taylor with white hair fighting fiercely. That battle was between Taylor and Elris herself, the person Shani owed her life to. Shani asserted that without Elris, she would not have survived until today. Elris's eyes in the flashback shone with an unshakable resolve. Returning to reality, Ed stood firm against the aftershocks of the attack, telling himself that even though he had heard the whole story, honestly, it didn't move him at all. He delivered a decisive punch to knock Shaney out, confirming that his feelings had not changed. Shaney collapsed, tears welling up, unable to believe that Ed was siding with Lortel. She faded into unconsciousness amidst despair and immense pain. Another explosion shook the entire building, and fire raged fiercely. Looking at Shaney's unconscious body, Ed bitterly admitted that he knew nothing about the backstories of side characters like her. He mused, concluding that this world inherently concealed countless untold stories. Ed wondered if there was any use in weighing the damage of this incident against the relief efforts Elris had previously undertaken to determine who was right or wrong. He decided that such judgment was meaningless. In his view, only those with privileged, fulfilling lives could make philosophical comments and freely decide their life choices. However, Ed's ultimate choice and goal had never changed since he transmigrated into this body. That goal was survival. Amidst the pain, a notification appeared. He had learned the pain endurance skill. Suddenly, a thrown stone shattered the window, breaking the silence. Ed spun around, startled and wary of the intruder. But upon closer inspection, he realized no one was there, and that he was in an unfamiliar room. He was in a luxuriously furnished room, but everything seemed arranged out of necessity rather than for decoration. The desk was covered in papers and books, neatly organized without a single flaw. Ed immediately recognized the style, muttering that it was very much like her. He approached the desk and discovered a pigeon cage hidden underneath. Wasting no time, Ed wrote an urgent letter, stating clearly that Elta was currently at Sylvania and would take at least 3 days to return to the main headquarters. He ordered the sale of all confiscated equipment. The homing pigeon was released, soaring into the stormy night, carrying a message that could determine Eltie's fate. Having completed his task, Ed quietly departed, heading into the dark forest. Although covered in injuries, he believed that with his past experiences, these wounds would quickly heal. Ed mused that without the help of Ziggs, Yenneker, and other favorable events, Lortel would certainly have embarked on an irreversible path to ruin. While Lortel's carriage had escaped Achen Island, Ed knew that Elte would not stand idly by. However, he trusted that the letter he sent would reach the headquarters and trigger Elte's downfall before he could act. Arriving at the rendezvous point in the forest, Ed was surprised to see a familiar figure, believing Lortel was waiting for him as planned. Lortel stepped out of the shadows, and Ed sarcastically remarked on her kindness for going to the trouble of meeting him. He suddenly realized with shock that he had been too complacent and needed to accept the harsh reality before him, because the person standing before him, the Golden Daughter Lortel, had drawn a dagger with murderous intent. Ed quickly analyzed that Lortel could control everyone who knew her secrets, from Elris and the twin sisters to Willain, and in her eyes, Ed Rothstaler was the only variable that could not be bought with money. He understood that, in this secluded location, if she eliminated him, her crime would be perfect. Lortel's nature was darkness, ready to exploit and discard anyone to achieve her goals. Ed gritted his teeth, determined to survive, but his heavily injured body had reached its limit. Lortel closed in, raising the dagger over the exhausted Ed, preparing to deliver the finishing blow. The sharp blade flashed in the darkness, ready to claim the only life standing in her way. Ed closed his eyes, seemingly accepting defeat, as he no longer had the strength to resist. However, Lortel's dagger-wielding hand suddenly trembled, revealing an unexpected hesitation. Instead of plunging the knife down, she grabbed his shirt, her voice trembling as she realized the extent of his injuries. Ed was stunned when Lortel exclaimed that he was this severely wounded. In a moment that defied all expectations, Lortel helped Ed toward a wooden cabin, stating that she would assist him. Under the warm glow of the fire, she looked at him gently and suggested they both warm up first. Lortel asked Ed if everything had gone according to plan, and Ed confirmed that it was a matter of course. Ed recounted that he had persuaded the coachman to risk his life to draw attention, leading Lortel to suspect he had resorted to kidnapping the family. Ed ignored the question, asserting that if this plan succeeded, he would gain a position of power within the Elta company. Lortel smirked smugly, boasting that the idea of her owing him a favor was unthinkable, and wondered if he felt pressured. Faced with Ed's silence, Lortel merely remarked that his reaction was dull. Immediately afterward, she smiled sincerely and offered her thanks. Lortel promised never to forget this favor, but Ed coldly demanded the 20 gold coins she had promised. Lortel then changed the subject, saying she had something else to ask, and Ed guessed it was about Elris. She denied it, stating that what she truly cared about was his relationship with Yenneker. Ed admitted he was close to Yenneker and praised her as a good person. Lortel agreed that Yenneker was a respectable senior. Ed looked straight at her, getting straight to the point. Lortel remained silent, lowering her head to look at the cup in her hand. She looked up with an enigmatic smile, admitting that she herself was not such a good person. Simultaneously, at Ophelis Hall, a wall collapsed amid the chaos. Alte Cahelland, after receiving an urgent report, abruptly led his subordinates away, no longer concerned with the battle. In a flashback, Ziggs was struggling in combat, realizing the presence of mercenaries was making things difficult. However, the greater threat came from his own allies, forcing him to divert his attention to stop them. Yennecar, initially only worried, gradually lost control as her summoned spirits grew stronger and more violent. Ziggs realized he had to stop Yennecar before casualties occurred. Meanwhile, in the present, Lortel asked Ed if something was wrong. A messenger pigeon landed on Lortel's shoulder, and she turned to ask Ed if he was angry. In response to Ed's question, Lortel remained silent for a moment, the messenger pigeon still perched on her shoulder. Then she turned back, an enigmatic smile on her lips and her eyes glowing red, and replied that she was not angry at all. Ed recalled what happened afterward. His uniform was ruined, and Ziggs was the one who lent him clothes and updated him on the situation. According to Ziggs, Willen had stepped forward to take full responsibility for the attack on Ophelis Hall. Headmaid Elris was still being interrogated but refused to confess, while Lortel was temporarily placed under supervision. Ed mused that the lack of major confrontational moves from the LT side indicated the plan had partially succeeded, and now they just had to wait. Returning to the present, he sighed by the stream, feeling tired and sore all over after the incident, forcing him to work slowly. He checked his life skill panel, confirming that the 2 slots for advanced production techniques were still empty. Learning a new skill became the top priority, and Ed already had his choices lined up. He planned to learn spirit channeling to support elementalists, and magic crafting to manufacture items. Ed knew that spirit channeling was acquired by crafting elemental items after signing a contract, while magic crafting required successfully disassembling a magical item. While contemplating signing a contract with a low-level spirit, he unexpectedly encountered Yennecar happily waving hello. Ed asked why she wasn't in class. Yennecar explained that she wasn't feeling well and was resting, then anxiously asked if he was injured. Hearing Ed deny it, Yennecar smiled in relief. She hesitated for a moment and then asked about Lortel. Ed replied that Lortel was resting in the cabin, while an imagined image showed her sulking outside. In reality, Lortel was sitting thoughtfully in the cabin, telling herself that even though the incident was over, she still had a lot of work to do. Her priority was to reclaim Elris and prepare for the negotiation to acquire the Sage's sealed tome. Lortel felt anxious having to stay in this wooden house for 3 days waiting for news from Elta's headquarters. Nevertheless, looking outside, she secretly thought that this feeling of annoyance wasn't so bad. Lortel Cahellan secretly thought that whenever she was near Ed Rothstaler, her heart raced. Standing by the window, she blushed as she recalled his kindness and unconditional trust, a warmth she had never experienced. For Lortel, who had lived her whole life on a cold path, this feeling was more precious than gold, and she was determined not to yield him to anyone, especially not to Yennecar Palarover, whom she imagined happily laughing beside Ed. Lortel angrily thought that Yennecar, who already had everything, should give up Ed for her. If not, she would only have to resort to schemes, and that was Lortel's specialty. With a cunning smile, she realized that 3 days together was too great an advantage, and perfect for making a move. Her first thought was to use her familiar method, burying the entire wooden house in a sea of gold coins. But Lortel quickly dismissed it, realizing that method wouldn't work, and she was currently short on cash, so she shifted to helping him with his tuition fees in the most natural way possible. She imagined herself haughtily tilting her chin, saying, "Don't misunderstand. I'm not helping because you're my senior." Immediately, Lortel felt so embarrassed she wanted to bang her head against the wall because of that naive thought, proving she had absolutely no dating experience. Her train of thought was interrupted when a voice asked her to move because she was standing in their spot. Lortel looked up blankly and saw Lucy standing at the door, letting out a long yawn. Lucy casually stretched out on the sunlit floor, leaving Lortel confused and wondering who this person was. Suddenly, Lucy screamed as she was mercilessly dragged away by someone. Ed appeared at the door, holding Lucy upside down, and explained to Lortel that the girl had probably come here to hide. He said he had handled it and told Lortel to make herself at home, leaving her completely speechless. Lortel curiously asked Ed if Lucy came here often. Ed replied that he only considered Lucy a natural disaster, then added that there was still one more person. Outside the log cabin at sunset, the thought lingered that the victor would be decided in 3 days. The next morning marked Lortel's second day living in the cabin. Lortel cheerfully poked her head out the window, greeting Ed with a burst of energy. However, Yennecar's immediate appearance completely overshadowed Lortel's efforts. Lortel could only let out a weary sigh upon seeing Yennecar already outside, engrossed in conversation with Ed. Her eyes flashed with annoyance, reflecting her determination not to concede easily. For a brief moment, the image of Lucy soundly asleep on the floor flashed through her mind. Meanwhile, Ed wiped the sweat from his brow, satisfied that he had finally completed his task. He had successfully crafted handmade bricks, which helped him level up his production skill. The fruit of his labor was a magnificent brick fireplace, which he had previously been unable to construct. Inside the cozy cabin, Lortel detected the scent of basil in the food, surprising Ed with her keen sense of smell. The three shared a meal. Lortel reported that the morning had been peaceful, but Ed cautioned her not to let down her guard. In her capacity as a merchant, Lortel affirmed she would repay Ed, and asked what he desired besides monetary compensation. Ed mused over construction materials before settling on what he truly wanted. He requested the remaining technical magic artifacts stored in her inventory. Lortel offered to recheck the stock, but Ed cut her off, stating that he had already memorized the entire list. Abruptly, Ed turned to Yennecar and asked her for a favor, causing the girl to choke on her meal. He explained that he wished to learn spirit magic and required her assistance in forming a contract. Yennecar was ecstatic, puffing out her chest to proclaim herself Ed's master, and promised to help him form a contract with an intermediate spirit. She summoned a small spirit named Karis to test Ed's sensitivity, but the creature panicked, crying out that it could not approach him. Ed was surprised that he could only vaguely perceive the spirit's voice, while Yennecar explained that he needed to raise his level of resonance. The spirit Karis unexpectedly revealed that it was fully aware of Ed's busy schedule, from building his house to running out of food, thanks to the weekly reports. Yennecar clasped her hands together, a surge of green energy enveloping her as she braced herself for Ed's question. With a radiant smile, Yennecar asked Ed if he had heard, but the blonde man only questioned the weekly reports she had just mentioned. Yennecar's smile instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, unsettling expression, as she remained silent in the face of Ed's suspicion. Lortel suddenly interjected, leaning against Ed's shoulder and smilingly asking if their conversation was finished, shattering the tense atmosphere. The discussion quickly shifted to the magic artifacts, and Ed proposed that Lortel sell them at the lowest possible price, deducting the cost from the 20 gold coins she still owed him. Lortel feigned offense at Ed's bargaining, but then suggested she might even give them away for free since they were merely surplus inventory. Lortel's green eyes gleamed with shrewd calculation, indicating that her offer was far from simple. Lortel presented her condition. In exchange, Ed must visit her store once every 3 days, using the excuse that this would allow her to sell at a cheap price and catch up on conversation. Yennecar flared up, arguing that Lortel was merely making excuses and should give the items to Ed for free. But Lortel simply crossed her arms and retorted that such an action would violate her business ethics. Ignoring the squabble, Ed continued eating and secretly calculated that this arrangement would allow him to begin studying both magical engineering and spirit magic. Their exchange was interrupted by the arrival of Belle Maya, the head maid, who appeared surprised to find Lortel in Ed's company. Lortel looked at Belle, one of her eyes flashing red as she announced that she had received a message from the senior maid. The scene shifted to a drying yard, where white sheets billowed in the wind, and a voice inquired about the subject of the impending conversation. Clara, Yennecar's friend, instructed her counterpart to maintain absolute secrecy regarding what she was about to say, stressing that it was highly classified. She leaned close to the other person's ear, whispering that the story concerned Yennecar. Clara revealed her earth-shattering secret to Belle Maya. She believed Yennecar had fallen in love with Ed Rothstaler. Belle Maya maintained a placid expression, secretly debating whether she should feign surprise at the revelation. Belle acknowledged Clara's anxiety, while Clara nervously explained that even though she didn't understand her friend's taste, she still wanted to support Yennecar. Clara worriedly mentioned that Yennecar had been frequently dropping a certain name lately. An ominous image of Lortel Cahelland, who had been absent with Ed during the opening ceremony and the entirety of the previous day, flashed through her mind. Clara frustratingly concluded that in the game of romance, Yennecar stood no chance, especially since Ed Rothstaler didn't even seem to notice her. Belle Maya offered a different perspective, suggesting that Ed was not a bad person but was simply in a difficult situation that precluded him from starting a relationship. Clara shuddered, insisting that Ed was merely a self-satisfied narcissist, intoxicated by his popularity among other girls. Meanwhile, Belle secretly compared Lortel to a cunning stray cat sitting outside a fish market. She then pictured Yennecar as an innocent kitten trembling before a tiger, causing the eavesdropping Yennecar to call her name in confusion. Finally, the image of Lucy soundly asleep on the roof appeared in Belle's mind, simply categorized as a cat. The conversation was interrupted when a blonde stranger approached Belle, sighing and apologizing that the presence of so many people was making him dizzy. Elsewhere, Lortel coldly asked the person before her what message they intended to convey. A maid bowed deeply, respectfully announcing that she carried a message from the former head maid, Elris. As night fell, a brilliant campfire roared, dispelling the surrounding darkness. Since it was late, Yennecar reluctantly returned to the dormitory, while Belle carried the deeply sleeping Lucy on her back and departed. Ed stood alone by the fire, contemplating his predicament now that his location was known to the Ophelis building officials. He opened a letter delivered by homing pigeon, which reported that the plan to overthrow Elte's power was nearly complete, and he needed to prepare for his return to the academy. Meanwhile, Lortel was also burning a piece of paper, believing her father was now preoccupied with his meaningless final battle and had no time to concern himself with Sylvania. Ed inquired about the possibility of Elte holding any remaining trump cards, and Lortel admitted that, while the possibility existed, she was forced to put her faith in Slog. She tossed the scrap of paper into the flames, thinking that the greatest concern Elris now seemed to be resolved. Ed questioned whether Elris would reveal Lortel's role as the mastermind, but she confidently asserted that she would not, as she had paid her in advance. Lortel explained that headmaid Elris would always seek to side with the ultimate victor between herself and Elte, thereby guaranteeing her silence. Lortel revealed that the parchment scroll Elris gave to Belle Maya contained a detailed list of the orphanages she had sponsored throughout her life. Elris's health continued to decline, but the academy ignored it, pushing her to the brink where she could no longer continue her work and care for the children. Cornered, Elris staked her entire life on the occupation plan, despite always maintaining a cold, indifferent exterior. Those who served Elris somewhat understood her desperate situation and psychological state. Lortel explained that once her victory was clear, Elris tried to switch back to her side. But trust, once lost, is difficult to regain. Lortel's gaze sharpened as she looked at Elris' letter, which was a testament to submission, not a threat. By the bonfire, she mused over the harsh rules of the merchant world, where there was no room for sympathy. She decided to burn the letter, asserting that she did not want the truth about her being the mastermind behind the incident to be exposed. With a relieved smile, Lortel suggested they reconcile, as no enemy or ally is permanent. The conversation shifted to the next plan, and Ed confirmed that he would soon visit the company's local branch to sign the contract. Before leaving, Ed handed Lortel a burning torch to light her way in the dark night. Lortel took the torch, her eyes showing a fleeting moment of confusion at his action. Ed unexpectedly commented that she was taller than he thought, surprising Lortel with the sudden remark. Deep down, Lortel felt her plan was somewhat rushed, but she considered doing something drastic to overcome her opponent. She looked directly at Ed, calling him senior with a tone full of hidden meaning. Suddenly, Lortel grabbed Ed's tie, analogizing that the nature of relationships was like push and pull, just like his crooked tie. As she adjusted his tie, she gently chided him, saying that as a Sylvania student, he should keep himself tidy. Then suddenly, she yanked the tie, pulling the stunned Ed down toward her. Under the firelight, the distance between the two was reduced to mere inches. Beneath the starry night sky, their silhouettes merged into one in a sudden kiss by the bonfire. Lortel stood on her toes, closing the final gap between them. After the moment passed, she smiled meaningfully, commenting that the raspberry flavor from dinner was delicious. Ed awkwardly asked her to keep her distance, but Lortel merely teased that he was hurting her feelings. She declared that next time she would let Ed take the initiative, as she needed more practice herself. With that, Lortel took a small flame to light her path, turned her back, and walked into the dark forest, leaving Ed alone. Her silhouette gradually disappeared behind the trees, leaving the silence of the night. Ed stood still, silently reflecting on his efforts to avoid getting involved with the main characters. He sighed, disappointed to admit that things had not gone according to his plan. The bonfire still crackled under the night sky, but Ed felt the path of the story beginning to twist and change. Despite his own wishes, a feeling of anxiety crept into Ed's heart, as if he were being pulled into the center of all the developments. His original plan was merely to observe from the sidelines, without any ambition whatsoever. He only wanted to graduate peacefully, but now realized that was a foolish challenge, and much harder than he had imagined. The summer passed amidst these complex thoughts. Soon enough, the leaves outside the window had changed color, signaling the arrival of autumn. Red leaves fluttered in the wind, revealing an entirely new scene. Suddenly, the tail of a giant firefox spirit flashed past. Under an ancient tree, Yennecar was resting with her spirits, when she heard a shocking rumor. The firefox had kissed Master Ed. Yennecar was startled, unable to believe her ears, as the wind spirit Dries urged her not to ignore this matter. The firefox spirit delightedly confirmed that it had witnessed the passionate scene firsthand, commenting that the fox-like woman certainly knew how to toy with people's hearts. Blushing fiercely, Yennecar hastily pressed for Ed's reaction, and the firefox spirit smiled, noting that it was a direct question. The firefox spirit recounted that whenever it looked at Ed, he seemed to maintain his distance, and it was astonished that even when kissed, Ed's expression remained unchanged. It remarked that Ed's cold reaction gave it the chills, suggesting there were only two possible explanations for this. The firefox spirit speculated that the fallen noble was either a eunuch or simply did not regard Lortel as a woman, causing Yennecar to breathe a sigh of relief. The firefox spirit warned Yennecar that people like Lortel become more obsessive the more they are rejected, and if she didn't act, she would lose Ed, but Yennecar awkwardly countered that Ed had reacted very coldly. While the firefox spirit urged Yennecar to seize the opportunity to teach Ed magic, the blue wolf spirit advised her not to listen and just be herself. The blue wolf spirit surprisingly agreed, suggesting that presenting a pure and fresh image wasn't a bad idea, then asked Yennecar if she had ever imagined a fun scenario with Ed. Blushing intensely, Yennecar stammered as a romantic image flashed through her mind. Surrounded by her spirits, Yennecar dreamily uttered the prospect of feeding each other. In her imagination, a spoon was offered with a sweet invitation. The train of thought shifted to Ed, who recalled the moment he was patiently feeding Lucy. After tasting it, Lucy's eyes suddenly glowed terrifyingly bright. From inside the wooden house, her frantic scream echoed, criticizing the terrible food. Lucy clung to Ed's head, complaining that he shouldn't use others as taste testers, while Ed ignored her, deep in thought about needing to find more ingredients and spices. Ed's life skills panel appeared, showing he had reached the intermediate artisan level with various skills such as crafting, design, and cooking. Ed realized that the dexterity stat was closely linked to life skills, and he needed to upgrade his stats evenly to optimize efficiency. Looking at the Academy's clock tower, Ed realized that his biggest problem right now was time. With the start of the academic year, the time he could dedicate to survival activities had been significantly shortened. He was determined to manage his time more effectively, as he also needed to spend time checking whether the main scenario was proceeding correctly. Therefore, whenever he had the chance, Ed tried to closely monitor the story's main characters, including the protagonist and the four heroines. He observed Taylor, the combat department student, maturing well with the support of his companion Isla. Ed noted that Princess Pena and her group were safe, but he knew the confrontation between her and Lortel was imminent. He considered Lortel Cahelland the most unpredictable variable, unsure how her plans would shift following Eltie's premature exit. Feeling time was increasingly scarce, Ed quickened his stride. He decided he needed to check the faculty building as well, because the final boss of Act 2 resided there. Ed silently affirmed his suspicion. The true mastermind behind the Ophelis Hall occupation was Professor Glast. In a different scene, Assistant Professor Cleo Elpin told Glast that she trusted his keen intuition. Glast adjusted his glasses while cautioning her not to overlook anything important. Shrouded in a dark aura, he demanded she locate a theological essay, causing Cleo to frantically promise she would find it by the next morning. Returning to the present, they were back at the faculty building within Ophelis Hall. Anise reported to Cleo that they had gathered all records pertaining to the occupation. Cleo leaned back exhaustedly in her chair, thanking Anise for her diligence. She began reviewing the documents with a pensive expression. Gazing at the files belonging to Ed, Lortel, and Yennecar, Cleo felt drained, wondering how much anxiety she needed to process to reach the correct conclusion. She continued turning the pages, deep in contemplation. Although she found nothing overtly suspicious, her attention fixated on Ed Rothstaler's file. A flashback began. Lortel was apologizing to Ed for being too busy to prepare things in advance. She invited him back to the LT store the following week, promising to prepare tea and pastries as an apology. Sitting across from Lortel, Ed listened as she discussed several magical technology items, before she abruptly inquired about his attire. Lortel confidently asked Ed how she looked, explaining that she had dressed up for an important meeting. Ed, surprised, asked for clarification about the meeting. In response to his question, Lortel showed a momentary flicker of confusion and fell silent. She offered a strained smile, vaguely conceding that it could be interpreted as such. Lortel then shifted the topic to Ed's cabin, and he admitted he needed furniture but couldn't afford the luxurious items available there. Lortel explained that giving away merchandise for free was against a merchant's ethics. She smiled slyly, brought up Ed's woodworking expertise, and then unexpectedly used magic to damage a nearby chair. Lortel declared the chair was now unsellable, and that she would discard it tomorrow, implicitly gifting it to Ed. Understanding her intent, Ed calmly took a sip of tea and offered his thanks. Lortel silently observed him with a look of satisfaction. Ed looked directly at her, asking how she managed to maintain such an impassive expression constantly. He placed his hand on the table, continuing his line of thought. Ed mused that her calm exterior was, in itself, Lortel's winning strategy. A metaphorical image of a couple kissing before a bonfire flashed through his mind. Suddenly, Lortel leaned in, touched Ed's tie, and stated frankly that he did not see her as a woman. She confessed that she, however, saw him as a man, and that all her actions thus far had stemmed from her own specific intentions. Ed responded that he understood what she was implying. Maintaining his composure, he said he hadn't expected such a frank answer, and reiterated her rule of never entering a battle she wasn't certain to win. Ed looked at Lortel, hinting that she was not the only one feeling uneasy in this situation. He realized her captivating smile remained unchanged. Whether she was assured of victory or backed into a corner, the true nature of a merchant who never reveals their genuine emotions. Within the magnificent grounds of Sylvania Academy, a special lesson was about to commence. With a decisive grip on her scepter, Yennecar Palarover declared the lesson underway. She cheerfully raised the staff, asking Ed Rothstaler if he was ready, and he calmly assented. A brilliant sphere of fire gradually materialized from the tip of the staff. Yennecar smiled, suggesting Ed attempt to use his magical power to connect with the spirit within. Ed nodded resolutely, his eyes gleaming with intense focus. He clasped his hands together, channeling energy into the fire sphere, causing it to erupt violently. From the center of the light, a tiny winged creature emerged and cheerfully greeted Ed. The low-level fire spirit introduced itself as Mug, expressing immense honor at contracting with him. Mug solemnly explained that it had undergone a rigorous 4-round selection process to secure this position, leaving Ed utterly bewildered. Ed broke out in a sweat as Mug continued to list its superior achievements compared to the other spirits. Shrouded in the flame of passion, Mug promised to dedicate its full power to supporting its new master. Ed suddenly recalled the experience of raising spirits in the game, a memory filled with joy and camaraderie. He looked at Mug and mused, why is this real-life experience so formal and militarized? Ed turned to ask Yennecar about Mug's training process, and she explained that she had selected an efficient spirit she was familiar with. As Ed questioned the selection procedure, an image of long lines of low-level spirits materialized. It turned out that the selection supervisor was none other than Takan, the high-level fire spirit, appearing as a shouting construction foreman. In a separate scene, Yennecar presented a small, bat-shaped fire spirit to another student. The brown-haired student smiled with delight as he felt the warmth radiating from the small creature in his palm. He innocently asked if controlling the resonance would alter the destructive power, causing Yennecar to laugh at his choice of terminology. Ed Rothstaler was stunned by the spirit he had just contracted with. While the fire spirit Mug was burning with enthusiasm, demanding orders, Ed was only thinking about acquiring a portable stove. The status window appeared, showing that Mug was a low-grade fire spirit with basic support and attack skills, and that Ed still had one empty spirit slot remaining. Ed's magic skills were also upgraded, officially reaching the level of a proficient mage and allowing him to learn intermediate magic. Yennecar Palarover was delighted to see Ed happy, as she always felt he had endured many hardships. She enthusiastically offered to tutor Ed in everything, from spirit resonance and sensing to spirit combat, even offering to lend him accessories from her room. Realizing she had been too forward, Yennecar suddenly became embarrassed and hastily concluded her offer. Yennecar's sudden shift in attitude left Ed completely bewildered. To hide her confusion, Yennecar suddenly acted haughty, declaring herself a top student who was too busy to easily arrange time. Under the imagined pressure from her spirits, she awkwardly asked Ed if offering free tutoring was perhaps too much. When Ed remained silent, Yennecar looked hurt, seemingly believing he agreed with the sentiment. On the contrary, Ed sincerely apologized for taking her kindness for granted and offered to pay, leaving Yennecar speechless. Yennecar flared up, scolding Ed for wasting money in their difficult survival situation and calling him heartless. Ed was utterly confused by her fierce reaction. He wondered why he was being scolded when Yennecar herself had brought up the issue of cost. Cornered, Yennecar blushed, awkwardly unable to explain herself. She blamed her friend Clara's advice, claiming she was practicing saying no because she was too kind, to which Ed merely commented that she had a good friend. However, Yennecar mumbled an admission that she didn't treat anyone else this way. Hastily changing the subject, she promised to explain in more detail next time at the combat practice room. Before rushing off to class, Yennecar promised to bring accessories, find textbooks, and gave Ed numerous instructions. Ed awkwardly waved goodbye, while the spirit Mug perched on his wrist. A system notification appeared, confirming he had learned the advanced production skill, magic engineering. Returning to the cabin, Ed reflected on how he had quickly analyzed the structure of the magic engineering items from Lortel, finally allowing him to learn a decent advanced skill. He gave a command, and a flame erupted in the fireplace. Ed was satisfied with his plan. Use mug when the firewood ran out, and use the fireplace when his mana was depleted, ensuring the space always remained warm. Now, a stable living arrangement was secured, giving him a feeling of absolute peace of mind. Ed felt a burden lifted from his heart, smiling serenely. Looking out the window, he realized time had passed and decided to go check the traps he had set. Meanwhile, Assistant Professor Cleo Elpin was walking through the dark forest, silently lamenting that she should have waited until tomorrow. She reasoned that there must be a shadowy force behind the occupation of the Ophelis dormitory, and Ed was an extremely suspicious individual. Cleo analyzed that, after eliminating those directly involved with the Ophelis dormitory and Taylor, only Ed remained. She came to the northern forest because she heard Ed often appeared here, but she figured there was no reason for someone to wander the woods at night unless they actually lived there. Suddenly, her eyes widened in astonishment as she discovered something. A bloodied, dead beast flew past, right in front of her. Cleo was stunned to see Ed carrying the unconscious Lucy May Reel on his back, while dragging the carcass of the beast with his other hand. She was completely frozen, unable to believe the sight before her eyes. She recalled that the unconscious person was an individual whom even Principal Obel had to exert his full strength to handle. That person was none other than Lucy May Reel. A drop of sweat trickled down, and Cleo shuddered, realizing her intuition about the shadowy force behind the occupation was correct. That culprit was Ed Rothstaler. From her vantage point, Cleo was horrified to realize Ed Rothstaler was carrying a person and dragging the carcass of a beast. She held her breath, confirming that the unconscious person on Ed's back was indeed Lucy May Reel. A flash of triumph sparked in Cleo's eyes. She believed her detective intuition had been perfectly accurate. Her gaze fell upon a small wooden cabin nearby, where smoke was rising from the chimney, revealing a hidden sanctuary. The entire scene before her eyes left Cleo dumbfounded. Ed, Lucy, the cabin, and a campfire. Ed casually tossed the beast's carcass onto the ground. He then gently placed the unconscious Lucy down next to a pile of firewood. Completely unaware he was being watched, Ed muttered about his plans for the next day and decided to go to bed early. Swallowing hard, Cleo resolved to act. Believing Lucy was in danger, she began to stealthily approach, determined to rescue her. Her hand slowly reached out, trying not to make the slightest sound. The moment her hand was about to touch Lucy, a surge of magical power suddenly flashed. Cleo stared blankly at her hand, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Lucy suddenly woke up, stood, and coldly questioned the stranger standing before her. Panicked, Cleo quickly backed away, stammering that she was an assistant professor. Her eyes widened behind her glasses, filled with confusion and fear. However, Lucy simply turned back to her spot, leaving Cleo standing dumbfounded in astonishment. From the shadows, Lucy's purple eyes continued to observe silently. She peeked her head out from behind the pile of firewood, her gaze no longer threatening but instead filled with curiosity. Suddenly, Lucy floated into the air, enveloped by a powerful purple magical aura, demonstrating her terrifying authority. Cleo stood frozen in silence, completely overwhelmed by what she had just witnessed. With a flash of realization, she whispered that she had known this all along. In another office, a book and a purple recording orb were slammed onto a desk as someone urgently called out Ed Rothstaler's name. Cleo, with an eager expression, explained to her superior that Ed Rothstaler was now simply called Ed after being disowned. Professor Glast coldly declared that he did not recall the names of useless individuals, forcing Cleo to mention Lucy. Cleo enthusiastically reported that Ed had overpowered the mighty Lucy, but Glast flatly dismissed her, calling her story absurd. She explained that she had gone to the Ophelis dormitory and used thought-recording magic, admitting she had fabricated a reason to do so. When Glast asked her to prepare a report, Cleo confidently presented the recording orb, asserting that she had already written it and would be forgiven. The recording showed Ed sitting menacingly in the shadows, and Cleo emphasized that he looked exactly like a mastermind. The sight of Ed's cold, glowing eyes and his sinister appearance in the footage silenced Glast for a moment. Unimpressed, Glast asked if that was all, but Cleo continued, recounting how Ed had carried the unconscious Lucy over his shoulder. The professor remained silent, continuing to read his book while Cleo stood waiting for his reaction. Dismissed, Cleo left in disappointment after Glast slammed the door shut and demanded she submit the report. Alone in his office, Professor Glast paused, a flicker of curiosity crossing his face. The recording continued, showing a past event where Ed confronted Taylor and his friends, only to be defeated in an instant. The scene sharpened, identifying Ed's opponents as the talented swordsman Taylor and the genius alchemist Elvira. It showed Ed's futile attempts at combat, highlighting the vast power gap between an average student and those prodigies. The light from the orb reflected in Glass's eyes, revealing his hidden interest in the footage. Holding the brightly glowing orb, Glass let out an intrigued "oh" upon seeing Ed's image inside. Meanwhile, in a distant part of the forest, a fierce explosion suddenly erupted. A violent surge of energy burst forth as the ornamental dagger was finished forging. The system announced that the crafting was complete. Ed's skill had increased, and the new item was a spirit-infused explosive dagger from Mug. Ed drew the glowing weapon, musing that it was satisfying to engrave additional features to make the dagger he always used more effective. With Mug perched on his shoulder, Ed noted with satisfaction that the spirit energy infusion had gone smoothly, its effectiveness boosted by his familiarity with the item. Mug joyfully declared that Master Ed had leveled up once again, and it would sing a song to express its delight. Just as Mug was about to launch into a shepherd's folk song, Ed grabbed it, causing the tiny spirit to frantically apologize for its shameful behavior. Mug burst into tears, wailing that the most shameful thing was that it didn't even know what it had done wrong, and begged to be taught. The fire spirit looked up with tear-filled eyes when Ed called its name. With a serious expression, Ed ordered Mug to drop the formalities. He mused that low-level spirits often raise their prestige by contracting with elementalists, and it was understandable for a spirit to be overly grateful to someone talented like Yennecar. Ed turned to question Mug, wondering why it was so excited to contract with someone like him, and asked directly if it had been promised anything. Seeing Mug hesitate, Ed urged it to tell the truth since they would be working together for a long time. Mug couldn't hold back any longer, sobbing as it confessed that its loyalty stemmed from its ambition to become great. It explained that it knew if it contracted with Ed and absorbed the refined mana surrounding Yennecar, it could grow twice as fast as other low-level spirits. Ed sighed, asking if Mug had anything else to confess. The little spirit added that it had researched the rumors and knew Ed was a person of authority, so it had tried its best to please him. Ed walked away, showing he understood the situation, while Mug on his shoulder continued to sniffle and complain about the harshness of the older spirits. He reassured Mug that everyone was just trying to survive, but the little spirit insisted on maintaining formality, and Ed agreed to let it do what made it comfortable. Afterward, Ed reflected that his combat skills were still lacking, as an axe heavily struck a log. Standing amidst the pile of split firewood, he admitted that even so, his physical strength now exceeded the average level of an adult man. Ed proudly looked at his fully stocked pantry, thinking that the days of starving and sleeping outdoors were long in the past. At his study table, he believed that with effort and diligence, memorizing and applying the theories taught in class was entirely possible, regardless of innate talent. Nevertheless, he couldn't deny the exhaustion from his rigorous schedule, causing his head to slump down from fatigue. Just as he was about to drift off, a familiar voice rang out, calling his name twice. Startled awake, Ed looked around dazedly. In front of him was Yennecar, who anxiously asked if something was wrong. Sitting by the fire, Ed apologized for his distraction, and Yennecar gently advised him to take care of his health. Shaking off his fatigue, Ed told himself he needed to focus on more important matters. He recalled the 3 letters he had received today, one from the Academy and one from the Elta Company, neither of which was surprising. But it was the 3rd letter that demanded his special attention, as it was proof that the storyline had dangerously deviated. Ed recalled that the main event of Act 2 was originally a 2-sided confrontation between the Academy and the Elta Company over the Sage's sealed tome. However, the unexpected intervention of Kreppen Rothstaler, the patriarch of the Rothstaler family, had turned the struggle into a volatile 3-way confrontation. Kreppen, a final boss who was only supposed to appear in Act 4, was seeking the book to achieve immortality and possess power far exceeding anyone else at the current time. Recognizing the threat, Ed was determined to use every means necessary to remove this overwhelmingly powerful character from the current plot progression. He feared that if Kreppen, who was already formidable in the future, obtained the book, winning the game would become impossible. The letter not only analyzed Kreppen's actions but also contained an invitation addressed to Ed himself from a mysterious sender. At the same time, in a luxurious courtyard, someone reported that they had personally delivered the letter to the northern forest as ordered. The recipient of the report, holding a teacup, smiled and offered thanks. It was Princess Penia, who called the messenger Claire and secretly pondered the Academy's critical financial situation reported by Principal Obel. She recalled the principal's secret plea, that the Academy could not stop the Elta Company from seizing the sealed tome, a treasure intrinsically linked to their very existence. However, Princess Penia still found something strange, wondering how Kreppen Rothstaler had learned about the negotiations and insisted on participating. Claire suggested that Ed Rothstaler himself might have leaked the information, perhaps hoping to be recognized and welcomed back by the family. Penia immediately dismissed that hypothesis, finding the possibility doubtful. Just then, Lortel Caheland approached, politely requesting permission to share tea with the princess despite her lower status. Penia could not hide her surprise at Lortel's sudden appearance. Sitting opposite her, Lortel skillfully denied hating Penia, asserting that she had come here to talk. Lortel revealed that the reason Crepin Rothstaler got involved was likely because of her father, Elte Caheland, and not Ed. Penia was completely stunned by this shocking revelation. Lortel explained that Crepin himself had requested her father seize the sage's sealed tome from the start, a fact she pretended to be unaware of. She asserted that the Elta company's plan remained unchanged despite her father losing his position, as they had invested too heavily in the transaction. Penia pondered, unable to understand why the Elta company and the Rothstaler family were competing when their ultimate goal seemed to be the same. Lortel took a sip of tea and then declared that she no longer intended to sell the book to the Rothstaler family, citing her unique circumstances. Penia looked directly into Lortel's eyes, questioning why she would reveal such a crucial company secret. Lortel frankly proposed an alliance based on the principle that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, as both wished to restrain the Rothstaler family and acquire the book. With a gentle smile, Lortel added that she feared Ed would be dragged into this matter, causing Penia to secretly doubt her sincerity. Lortel continued to defend Ed, arguing that he had already abandoned his family, and it would be unfortunate if he were misunderstood simply because of his past. Deep down, Penia was skeptical of Lortel's motives, but also conceded that Ed's usefulness in this game was undeniable. She decided she would ask Ed for help, even using her authority to command him if necessary, but hesitated when she considered his potential refusal. Lortel noticed Penia's hesitation and asked what she planned to do next. Penia's gaze sharpened as she reached her final conclusion. If Ed did not cooperate, she would have to utilize him. Following Princess Penia's declaration, Lortel Caheland bowed her head, her entire body trembling as she asked if the princess truly intended to exploit Ed. Penia merely curled her lips slightly, suppressing a contemptuous laugh at Lortel's reaction. Immediately, Lortel looked up with a sneer, wiped away her feigned tear, and challenged the princess back, asking if she truly had the power to do so. Claire, the royal guard captain, angrily slammed the table and stood up, chastising Lortel for her insolent attitude, but Penia raised a hand to stop him. Lortel turned on her heel and walked away, reiterating that they were allies, and thus she wished to offer some sincere advice. With a chilling gaze, Lortel warned Penia not to try using Ed as a tool, or she herself would be the one exploited. Claire remained furious, demanding that the princess hold Lortel accountable, but Penia calmly brushed him off, saying everything was fine. Penia sank into thought, realizing the situation was becoming increasingly complicated with Ed's unpredictable moves, Crepin's involvement, and now an arrogant, unyielding Lortel. She watched Lortel Caheland's retreating back, wondering if she would ever see the girl show confusion or helplessness. Ironically, at that very moment, Lortel suddenly flinched and stopped, the confident expression on her face replaced by astonishment. The cause of her confusion was the unexpected appearance of Ed Rothstaler and Yennecar Palarover right in front of her. At the Elta Company branch, Yennecar innocently explained that Lortel had only prepared tea for 2 people, while also teasing her about refusing to give customers free water because it was considered merchandise. Ed politely offered his share of the tea to Yennecar, causing Lortel, who was walking away, to subtly frown in annoyance. Lortel quickly regained her professional demeanor, turning back with a warm smile and asking Ed about the magical artifact he required. Before Ed was an entire shelf filled with glittering magical items, looking completely brand new. Yennecar immediately challenged Lortel, arguing that giving away brand new merchandise for free went against the business ethics she constantly preached. Lortel cleverly pointed out small scratches and flawed magical inscriptions, explaining that they were all defective goods that could not be sold. Exposed, Yennecar angrily shouted that Lortel had done this intentionally, but Lortel merely smiled and replied that the important thing was whether or not they helped Ed. Ed felt guilty about constantly receiving free items, but Lortel cheerfully waved her hand, saying that as long as he continued to renew his contract, that small amount of money was negligible. Yennecar anxiously suggested they pay for the items outright, but Lortel dismissed her, asserting that it was a matter for her and Ed to decide, leaving Yennecar to helplessly cry out in frustration. Mid-conversation, Ed suddenly felt dizzy as a familiar sensation washed over him. He felt as if he were floating underwater, trapped in a strange sensation despite having so many things left to do. In his mind, Ed reminded himself to be wary of Crepin Rothstaler, who had interfered with the sale of the sage's sealed tome. However, he pushed that aside and thought about the more urgent task of making a mattress for his bed. He also needed to skin the young deer he had caught and clean up the log cabin. Ed's train of thought halted when he remembered he was out of dried meat for Lucy. Amidst his hazy mind, an anxious voice called out his name. Yennecar and Lortel were trying to shake him awake, desperately attempting to rouse the fading Ed. Meanwhile, in a luxurious building within the academy, Princess Penia was deep in contemplation. She reflected on Ed's actions, from his focus on survival to his composure during the glass can incident. Penia recalled the rumors that he only focused on his studies, as well as Lortel's warning not to judge him hastily. She began to doubt her initial assessment and decided she needed to confirm everything herself. That was why she had sent a summons, requesting Ed meet her at the royal dormitory. Penia turned to ask Claire about Ed's schedule, but the royal guard captain reported that he would be unable to attend for some time. When the princess questioned why Ed dared to refuse a royal decree, Claire began to explain. Claire announced that Ed Rothstaler had collapsed from overwork, leaving Penia stunned. A status window appeared, showing that Ed was suffering from the depletion status, with a range of severe symptoms from high fever to muscle weakness. Ed let out a groan, struggling to open his eyes through the pain. He felt breathless, his body heavy, and a burning sensation in his lower abdomen. Upon waking, Ed realized Lucy was sound asleep on top of him. While deep in sleep, Lucy mumbled about the jerky being too salty. Ed woke up, his body trembling from exhaustion, and realized his friend was also sleep-talking about jerky. He suddenly realized Lucy was much lighter than her small appearance suggested. It was unbelievable that a person could weigh so little. Even so, Ed still couldn't move. Understanding that the problem lay in his own debilitated state, he realized he was in the log cabin, and this new blanket must be a product from the Elte company. Immediately upon waking, Lucy complained of hunger, leaving Ed speechless and wondering if she did anything besides eat and sleep. Lucy congratulated Ed on waking up, her hand radiating a brilliant green stream of healing magic. She explained that his mana had become completely chaotic due to months of non-stop practice of magic and spirit summoning techniques. When Ed asked if she had been doing this the entire time he slept, Lucy casually replied that it wasn't difficult but was too boring, so she had dozed off a few times. Lucy also recounted that the presence of Yennecar and Lortel had been quite bothersome, even though their presence was necessary. With a serious expression, Lucy instructed Ed never to get sick again. She clenched her fist, recalling the painful memory of her grandfather Glocht, who had died from illness, explaining her obsession. Moved by her care, Ed could only whisper a sincere thank you. Suddenly, the creak of the door opening echoed, and a voice called out, asking after Ed. Ziggs, a student from the magic department, poked his head in and explained that he had built a fire outside because he wasn't sure if he was allowed to use the fireplace. The young man froze, silent as he witnessed the confusing scene. Lucy was lying on top of Ed in the bed. Caught in the act, Lucy awkwardly scrambled off Ed in embarrassment. To escape the awkward situation, she immediately shot straight up the chimney and vanished. Ziggs was dumbfounded, beginning to question the sheer number of girls surrounding Ed. While Ed muttered about cultural differences, Ziggs concluded that it was inevitable for a strong man to attract many women. Ziggs, whose hair had grown long over time, questioned Ed about why he was there. He explained that Yennecar and Lortel had both left for their own business, adding that he had let his hair grow longer to suit the autumn season. Ziggs carefully fed Ed a spoonful of hot soup. Ed grimaced at the terrible taste of the dish. But Ziggs could only say that he had no other choice, and that the more skilled cooks were unavailable. Ziggs nervously admitted that Lortel had issued an order forbidding other girls from coming near, while her terrifying image flashed through his mind. Chewing with difficulty, Ed decided to check the story's progress, and asked about the rumors of alchemy students causing trouble with Mandragoras. Ziggs recounted that Elvira was indeed the troublemaker, but Taily and Clevius had quickly cleared out the Mandragoras, leaving Ed secretly satisfied that the scenario was still on track. Ziggs went on to mention the rumors about the monsters in the sewers, but Ed knew the truth was that he and Taily had quietly dealt with them already. Ed mused, realizing that only the biggest event, the battle for the Sage's sealed tome, had yet to occur, and then asked how long he had been unconscious. Ziggs revealed that today was the 10th day, leaving Ed completely stunned. Ziggs added that Yennecar and Lortel had both reluctantly left for important matters, while Ed snatched the bowl of soup from his hand. Ed gulped down the soup, his mind reeling as he realized he had been in a coma for 10 long days. Ed let out a sharp breath and urgently called Ziggs's name. With a panicked expression, Ed demanded that Ziggs immediately send a message to Lortel because time was running out. At the academy, the highly unpredictable event, the battle for the Sage's sealed tome, officially began. Those present at the scene included Princess Penia Kroll, seated solemnly beside her guard knight, Claire. Lortel Cahelland was also present, smiling confidently as the representative for the Elta Company. And then, An unexpected figure, someone who should not have appeared according to the original storyline, began to step inside. That person was none other than the head of the Rothstaler family, identified by his glittering lapel pin. Krepin Rothstaler, the final boss of Act 4, had arrived with a smug smile, signaling a deadly variable. Inside a magnificent building, the fateful meeting began. Princess Penia, who was dining, looked up and expressed her pleasure at seeing Krepin in good health. Krepin gently stopped her, stating that although it had been a long time, he had not yet had the chance to formally apologize. He reiterated that a foolish member of the Rothstaler family had caused her trouble, and he had disowned Ed as commanded. Penia coldly dismissed him, telling him not to worry about it. Meanwhile, Penia secretly observed the man across from her, confirming he was Krepin Rothstaler, a relative of Ed. She mentally reviewed what she knew about him. A powerful duke, a noble, benevolent, and wise family head, deeply respected by his subordinates. However, Penia's special ability screamed a different truth. This man was undoubtedly a villain. Krepin shifted the conversation, turning to the third person present and recognizing the representative of the Elte company. Lortel Cahelland stood up, bowed, introduced herself, and was acknowledged by Krepin as the daughter of the renowned Golden King, Elte Cahelland. With a meaningful smile, Lortel declared that her family was always drawn to the scent of gold and profit. Krepin narrowed his eyes, silently conceding her point. The negotiation for the sale of the sage's sealed tome officially began, following the strict procedure where all parties would write their bids on paper. In the auction room, Lortel sat on one side, facing Penia and Krepin, all understanding that the highest bidder would acquire Sylvania Academy's treasure. Penia knew well that the Academy did not want to publicize the fact that they had to sell their treasure due to financial difficulties. Therefore, Principal Obel had arranged a discreet auction, with Penia acting as a witness and Vice Principal Rachel presiding. The bidding would be as simple as possible. The highest bidder between the two parties would gain ownership of the tome. Vice Principal Rachel, who was overseeing the process, focused intently, recalling her research on similar transactions. Other magical texts, such as the Tome of Order Magic, were valued up to 8,100 plen gold coins. Rachel glanced at Lortel, assessing her opponent, while considering the magical, academic, and luxury value of the treasure being auctioned. In Rachel's mind, a shrewd merchant like Lortel surely understood the value of all types of magical texts. A decisive hand put pen to paper, recording a new bid in the silent auction. Penia was certain that Krepin Rothstaler, with his composed demeanor, would be the one to acquire the sealed tome. Vice Principal Rachel formally announced that she had received bids from both parties. Standing next to Krepin, Penia secretly judged that the key to this unlimited auction was understanding the opponent's limits. Lortel smiled confidently, asserting that her motto was only to pursue profitable ventures. Penia calculated that Lortel would never bid higher than 8,100 gold coins, as that would make reselling the item unprofitable. As Rachel prepared to announce the results, Penia believed that if Krepin bid just slightly higher, the victory would be his. Krepin's bid was revealed to be 8,500 gold coins, perfectly matching Penia's prediction. Penia was pondering Krepin's true motives when Rachel called out the name of the next bidder, Lortel Cahelland. The entire room was stunned, and Penia froze upon hearing Lortel's unbelievable bid. 9,400 gold coins. Lortel bowed, accepting the victory, leaving Penia aghast as she realized Lortel's objective had nothing to do with profit. Krepin Rothstaler angrily clicked his tongue, coldly announcing his immediate departure. Watching Krepin and his entourage leave, Penia still struggled to decipher Lortel's true goal. Suddenly, a new hypothesis flashed through the princess's mind. She recalled Lortel's previous words, that at least for this occasion, they were allies. Penia wondered in astonishment. Could Lortel's entire plan simply be to prevent the tome from falling into the villain's hands? But she quickly dismissed the thought, as Lortel was not one to act for justice, and she had no concrete evidence against Krepin. Another possibility arose. Lortel was acting under the orders of someone else, someone who knew Krepin's true nature and wanted to stop him. The image of Ed Rothstaler appeared in her mind. In a flashback, Lortel smiled, reassuring Ed that she knew the rumors of him working for the Rothstaler family were completely false. In Penia's mind, a new truth formed. Ed Rothstaler, the outcast of his family, had always been secretly fighting against that very evil force. The shock caused Princess Penia to stagger, and Claire had to rush to support her as she wondered what sin she had committed. Overwhelmed by guilt, Penia realized in horror that she herself had pushed such a person into the abyss of despair. However, the princess's misunderstanding might actually be the best thing for future developments. Meanwhile, Lortel Cahelland calmly reviewed the certificate of sale, confirming she now owned the sealed tome for 9,400 gold. She calculated that reselling the tome to Crepin would result in a loss of 900 gold, proving her earlier declaration was merely an act. Lortel's sharp gaze reflected a plan far deeper than mere profit. She recalled Ed's promise. He would do anything for her if she won the tome, an offer Lortel considered a fatal mistake by someone who understood nothing about merchants. With a triumphant smile, Lortel mused that trading 900 gold for a priceless favor from Ed was an incredible bargain. Lying in bed, she reveled in the thought of the two words anything that Ed had promised. Lortel's face flushed with delight and bold calculations, an expression that might have caused Princess Penia to cough up blood if she had witnessed it. And just like that, the auction concluded with Lortel's victory. Elsewhere, Ed had woken up and was sitting by a fire with Ziggs, speculating that Lortel had trusted him because of the Rothstaler family's reputation. He felt a momentary pang of guilt for Lortel regarding what was about to happen, but his train of thought was interrupted by a joyful shout. A figure rushed toward them at terrifying speed, kicking up dust along the way. Yennecar appeared, breathless, having rushed to visit Ed as soon as she heard he had woken up. She frantically denied it when Ed apologetically said he had caused her trouble. Ziggs seized the opportunity to tease her, recounting how Yennecar had cried and panicked out of worry, embarrassing her so much that she had to cover his mouth. To hide her embarrassment, Yennecar quickly summoned a giant bear spirit and ordered it to drag Ziggs away while she tried to distract Ed. Behind her, the fire spirit Mug mischievously peeked out, secretly observing the whole scene. Mug, the fire spirit, knelt at Ed Rothstaler's feet, sobbing and pleading for punishment for abandoning his master. With a look of distress, Mug explained that it had feared its sudden appearance would interfere with Ed's magic, forcing it to seek refuge with Yennecar. Ziggs, standing beside the golden bear spirit, explained to Ed that Mug's extreme reaction was understandable, as Ed had been unconscious for 10 days. The two words, 10 days, struck Ed's mind like a hammer blow, leaving him utterly stunned. In his daze, the image of the decomposing deer carcass in his storage shed flashed through Ed's mind. Following that was the sight of his tattered, empty fishing net, a testament to wasted effort since he hadn't been able to repair it. Ed sighed in exasperation, realizing his entire food supply was ruined, and he would have to start his preparations from scratch. Immediately, his gaze sharpened, and his mind began calculating the necessity of throwing himself back into overwork. Noticing his focus, Yennecar and Ziggs stepped forward, both insisting that they would help Ed with hunting and all necessary preparations. Relieved by his friend's sincerity, Ed reassured himself that everything would be fine if he just tackled the problems one step at a time. The unexpected offer of help reminded Ed of the crude shelter he had constructed in the past. The memories flooded back, transporting him to his most desperate and impoverished days. He recalled the flimsy hut built from dry branches, his only refuge when he possessed nothing else. He reminisced about sinking into lonely sleep, constantly bitten by insects. Looking at Yennecar and Ziggs, Ed realized that although it had taken a long time, simply surviving day by day had allowed him to achieve so much. A smile of relief and confidence spread across Ed's lips, certain that everything would turn out all right. Yennecar watched him silently, thinking to herself that Ed looked utterly drained. Elsewhere, Yennecar lay upon the back of the white wolf spirit, Marilda, listening to her counsel. Marilda suggested this was the perfect opportunity for Yennecar to approach Ed while Lortel was preoccupied. Marilda stated bluntly that if Yennecar wanted to win the man she desired, she needed to learn how to act like a cunning fox. When criticized for her outfit looking like a country bumpkin's, Yennecar bowed her head in embarrassment, self-consciously admitting that she wasn't attractive. Marilda reassured Yennecar that she was perfect in a different way, leaving the girl bewildered. The High Spirit explained that the image of a capable, independent girl would greatly appeal to Ed, and advised Yennecar to stay by his side and care for him like a devoted wife. Marilda, who claimed to be a dating expert despite her lack of experience, urged Yennecar to seize this chance to advance their relationship. Yennecar blushed profusely, flustered by Marilda's audacious suggestion. When Marilda pressed her for a concrete plan, Yennecar awkwardly confessed that she had no intentions whatsoever. Yennecar's passivity enraged Marilda, and the spirit's eyes flashed fiercely in the gloom. Marilda let out a desperate howl, causing the small wind spirits to scatter in terror. The spirit roared, chastising Yennecar for missing the golden opportunity, while Ed was at his weakest, a state that would never be repeated. With a surging wave of murderous intent, Marilda stressed that this was Yennecar's sole chance to become the person Ed could truly depend on. Cornered, Yennecar quickly whispered a plan into Marilda's ear. Upon hearing it, Marilda looked satisfied, admitting that the plan was quite clever. That night, in the log cabin deep in the forest, Ed was slowly recovering. He secretly praised Yennecar's stew as vastly superior to Ziggs, and resolved that he needed to learn her recipe. Despite his determination not to show fatigue, Ed knew he needed to focus on restoring his health. But his body was still weak. A headache and a slight fever struck him the moment he lay down. A faint creaking sound made the drowsy Ed open his eyes. Standing in the doorway, Yennecar worriedly commented that Ed looked utterly exhausted. Ed asked in surprise why she hadn't returned to the dormitory, but Yennecar merely offered a shy, awkward smile. She offered a gentle, warm smile illuminated by the lamplight. Then, without waiting for Ed to speak further, Yennecar stepped inside and sat on the floor beside his bed, insisting that everything was fine. Yennecar gently advised Ed that there was no need for him to pretend he was fine. She explained that when the body is weary, the spirit is also depleted, and she understood better than anyone how much he had struggled. Yennecar recalled that in her most desperate moments, Ed's silent presence beside her had been the greatest source of comfort. With understanding eyes, she whispered that he had worked hard and done exceptionally well. When Ed attempted to object, Yennecar decisively cut him short. She urgently requested that he admit his exhaustion so he could finally allow himself to rest. Finally, Ed lowered his guard, leaned back into the bed, and admitted that she was right. He let out a long, heavy breath, shedding all his burdens. Lying on the bed, Ed allowed the true feeling of exhaustion to finally wash over him. While Yennecar had already drifted off to sleep beside him, he whispered the confession that everything had truly been difficult. The morning sunlight streamed through the window, accompanied by birdsong, signaling a new day. Ed sprang up into a sitting position, a feeling of complete refreshment flooding his body. He was surprised when he noticed something right beside him. It turned out Yennecar had stayed the entire night, sleeping soundly with her head resting against his bedside. Ed couldn't help but chuckle at the adorable sight. He smiled brightly, confidently declaring that he was now fully recovered. Standing outside, Ed wiped the sweat from his brow and began contemplating his next steps. Focusing on one crucial field, he was acutely aware of the importance of magic engineering, a high-level production skill capable of boosting core attributes. However, Ed knew that self-teaching by dismantling and recreating magical items had its inherent limitations. The biggest issue was that advanced magic engineering formulas were typically rewards for main quests, which he had always diligently tried to avoid. Ed mused, realizing that the protagonist Taylor had absolutely no interest in magic techniques. He understood that even with the formula, Taylor couldn't craft anything due to lacking materials that only appear in later stages of the game. But for Ed, it was different, and his train of thought was interrupted by a voice asking what he was preoccupied with. In a forest, Lortel Keheland expressed relief that Ed had recovered after collapsing, while Ed secretly thought she was the very person who could provide him with any materials he needed. Lortel stepped forward, humorously complaining that she, too, was suffering from chronic fatigue. She lamented having to take care of her dry hair and problematic skin. Ed sat down next to her, asking why she had time to visit him, and Lortel replied that she also needed a break and had something important to discuss. Lortel revealed her plan to restructure the company after her adoptive father was overthrown, and she needed someone to help manage it, a co-leader. Ed broke out in a cold sweat, stunned by the offer to become a co-leader. Lortel blushed, smiling mischievously, and told him to just imagine it. She painted a future scenario where they worked together, sharing her private assets, likening it almost to marriage. Realizing she had said too much, Lortel gave an awkward laugh, prompting Ed to call her name to interrupt. Ed stated frankly that her proposal was somewhat strange, causing Lortel to fall silent, hiding her expression beneath her hood. Lortel pulled her hood lower, whispering that Ed didn't understand, much to his confusion. She accurately guessed Ed's thoughts that he believed she was acting on the impulsive emotions of a young girl. Ed secretly admitted she was right, believing their relationship should only remain at the level of business partners. But Lortel explained that in a cruel world where betrayal is necessary for survival, the most important thing is something entirely different. With a confident smile, she asserted that the most necessary thing is someone who will never betray you. She placed a hand on Ed's shoulder, emphasizing that this person would stay by his side even if he lost everything. Ed fell silent, pondering Lortel's words about an absolutely loyal companion, whether that be family, a lover, or a soulmate. Ed reflected that for someone like Lortel, who had witnessed countless powerful figures fall, the fear that the same fate might one day befall her must constantly smolder in her heart. With sharp eyes, Lortel whispered that she wasn't asking for much. She looked up at Ed with an embarrassed expression, gently asking if he could stay by her side. Taken aback by the request, Ed could only utter her name in confusion. The tense atmosphere shattered as Lortel burst into hearty laughter, admitting her act had failed, while Ed pointed out that her voice had risen suspiciously high. Lortel playfully asked if her display of weakness had managed to stir his protective instincts, explaining that it was a tactic to destabilize the opponent. A moment of silence passed, broken only by the gentle sound of running water. The playful look vanished as Lortel sat down and admitted that not everything she had said was a lie. The two sat silently by the stream, lost in their own thoughts. With a resolute expression, Ed declared that he intended to graduate from Sylvania Academy and had no intention of leaving prematurely. Lortel's face was cast in shadow as she listened to his assertion. A mysterious smile returned to her lips as she replied that she hadn't yet decided what she would do after graduation. Lortel stood up, saying she could wait until then, but also reminded Ed that he never had a choice to begin with. She held out a piece of paper, warning that she might soon call upon the favor he had promised. With one final graceful smile, she said goodbye and turned to leave. Left alone, Ed sighed heavily, feeling that he had just incurred another emotional debt right before the impending disastrous events. From a distance, Lortel secretly glanced back, thinking to herself that she had almost failed. She recalled her original plan was simply to say, "You are mine now," and walk away. However, Lortel admitted that seeing Ed's distressed appearance had derailed her plan, because if she had simply left, she herself would have completely dropped her guard. Lortel stood outside, holding a small bag of change she had prepared to pay Ed, but felt too awkward to go back now. She decided she would go to his cabin and leave the money bag there. When Lortel arrived, the door suddenly swung open. Yennecar stepped out, yawning widely and thinking about preparing food for Ed. The two froze in shock upon unexpectedly running into each other right outside the door. A fierce confrontation erupted. Lortel questioned Yennecar's presence inside the house, while Yennecar suspiciously asked why Lortel was approaching from the riverside. As sparks flew between the two hostile gazes, a new disaster for Ed officially began. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Ed was chopping firewood amidst incessant grumbling. The spirit mug flew around him, urgently demanding that his master eat and rest more regularly, worried about their contract. Ed gently comforted the teary-eyed mug, guessing that the high-ranking spirit Takan had scolded it over his situation. He sighed, looking at the letters in his hand and thinking that even though everything was settled, one difficult problem remained. These were the 3 letters he received before collapsing from exhaustion. One from Lortel warning about Elta, and one from Princess Pania reporting on Crepin's movements. The final letter came from the Academy, but the sender was a figure he had never expected. That person was Professor Glast, with a message requesting a private meeting after the conference. But because he had collapsed and been unconscious for too long, Ed missed the meeting, unable to learn its purpose. This was extremely dangerous, as Professor Glast was the final boss of Act 2, and the final chapter of this drama had already begun. Ed recalled that Glast always believed only exceptional geniuses like the great sage Sylvania could change the world. For that reason, he planned to use celestial magic to resurrect the great sage. Ironically, Sylvania Academy fell into Lortel's trap and sold the sealed tome, the core item Glast needed to complete his spell. In desperation, Professor Glast stole the sage's sealed tome, using Ayla's body as a vessel to transfer Sylvania's soul, thus initiating a new era. That was the conspiracy of a fanatic. However, Glast's mistake was kidnapping Ayla, because to rescue her, Taylor plunged into the battle, sweeping through every corner. Glast's plans were constantly thwarted, and he met his end within the very mage tower he had summoned. The man who dedicated his life to academic progress fell from the top of the tower after uttering his final words. Ed tried to recall what those dying words were. Regardless, the final battle of Act 2, the Glast Conquest, began with a resonance ritual intended to change the ownership of the sealed tome. Simultaneously, Professor Glast kidnapped Ayla. Upon waking, she screamed in fear, demanding that he stay away from her. Glast coldly scoffed, pointing to the gigantic demon imprisoned right in front of her. Ayla burst into tears, horrified by the gruesome sight. Suddenly, Ed Rostalor appeared, causing Ayla to shout his name in astonishment, but he calmly stated that she was overreacting. Ayla indignantly yelled that she had been kidnapped, to which Ed coldly replied that he had been too. Ed sighed wearily at their shared ironic predicament. The story flashed back 3 days, to the log cabin in the forest. Having just woken up from a 10-day coma, Ed assembled a mechanical device, and secretly regretted wasting so much training time. He realized the Glast Conquest was about to begin, but his magic technique stat was still too low. Suddenly, a thought flashed through Ed's mind. He suddenly remembered a way to rapidly increase his magic technique stat in a short period. The Glast Conquest, the final chapter of Act 2, would take place simultaneously across 4 different areas. Ed recalled the most difficult area in the upcoming conquest. Phase 3, the secret laboratory. The boss of this location was Reyna, the librarian of the Soul Library, an almost unbeatable opponent without the skills of a swordmaster. However, Ed figured that was Taylor's job. He was only interested in the books within the library. He recalled that they contained countless valuable magic technique crafting formulas, including 2 formulas for legendary-grade items. Ed was aware of the danger inherent in this plan, but glancing at Yennecar, who was inside his house, he believed everything would be fine as long as he wasn't going alone. In a classroom, Professor Glast announced that Adele from Class B and Ayla from Class C would be transferring in next semester, noting that this year had quite a few talented students. He reassured the class that the addition of new students would not affect their lessons. While the other students chatted, Ziggs and Elvira listened, with Elvira recalling that there was a time when Professor Glast's Class A had no students at all. Elvira raised her hand, musing that although Ayla's combat skills were not strong, she was exceptionally sensitive to celestial magic. Ziggs stood up to question, hesitantly asking if it was fair to decide who entered Class A based solely on talent. As Ziggs tried to speak about the students who were putting in their best effort, Professor Glast interrupted with a sharp question. Glast directly asked Ziggs Eifelstein if he believed the professor scorned those students' diligence and ruined their futures, leaving Ziggs stunned. Professor Glast coldly declared that he disagreed, and the best way to ruin someone's future was to sow false hope based on mediocre talent and push them toward an unattainable goal. Elvira sighed, recalling that she had investigated the professors before coming to Sylvania Academy. She deduced that Glast's rigid and self-righteous obsession with talent was likely related to his daughter. Miori, Professor Glast's only daughter, was an ordinary mage, but he wholeheartedly believed in her potential. Instead of seeing it as a father's belief, Miori mistook it for recognition of her talent from a magic department professor, leading her to participate in an overwhelming monster conquest where she lost her life. Professor Glast's trembling hand touched the cold body of his daughter. Following that tragedy, the pain transformed into a mad obsession, pushing him onto a dark path. He buried himself in the study of celestial magic, a mysterious field at Sylvania Academy. But Elvira Aniston deduced that, given his tragic past, what he was truly seeking was not the magic itself. The history of the Academy and ancient magic seemed to hold the answer he craved. Elvira believed that Glast bringing Ayla into Class A was closely related to this research, and she also suddenly thought of Lortel Cahelland. Professor Glast was about to say something but stopped, muttering to dismiss the matter. He ended the debate, but Elvira knew Glast was furious because the sage's sealed tome, an item crucial to his research, was about to be sold. Meanwhile, Lortel smirked inwardly, confident that the book would soon belong to her through the resonance ritual. Elsewhere, a female professor announced that the ritual to transfer ownership of the book was about to begin. In the meantime, Ed Rothstaler had also managed to devise his own plan. He planned to let Taylor fight to rescue Ayla, while he would follow closely behind. Ed's goal was to collect all the items Taylor left behind, especially at the Soul Library of Magic Techniques. He was targeting 2 extremely powerful items, Glock's Eye and Delheim's Hourglass. Ed knew that Taylor couldn't craft them at this stage, so he decided to claim them for himself. After witnessing Taylor's victory, Ed would complete his overall plan and retreat. He explained that everything would begin on the day of the ritual, and he had asked Yennecar for help finding an item in the underground waterways. Ed felt a pang of guilt recalling the enthusiastic expression of Yennecar, who completely believed his lie. He was confident that the plan would be perfect when a voice suddenly called out his name. Ed was stopped by Assistant Professor Cleo, who relayed that Professor Glast wished to see him. Although he found the summons right before the resonance ritual suspicious, Ed agreed. On the way, he recalled missing their last appointment due to exhaustion, and believed this time it must be important. Upon arriving at Professor Glast's office, Ed was startled to hear a panicked scream from inside. He was astonished to see Ayla there, who looked at him with an expression full of disgust and fear. Ed briefly recalled his past as Ayla's bully, understanding her reaction. However, what shocked him more was the presence of Ayla, who should have been kidnapped in the original storyline. A terrifying hypothesis flashed through Ed's mind as he wondered why he had been summoned as well. In his mind, he frantically flipped through Glast's desk, searching for an explanation. He scanned through all of the professor's research notes, notebooks, and magic books. Yet, Ed could not find any factor that might have altered the plot. Finally, he realized the only thing that could implicate him was a report containing his photograph. Ed deduced that the report written by Cleo had informed Glast of his role in the Ophelis Hall incident, but he still didn't understand how it related to Ayla. His train of thought was cut short by footsteps and the sharp sound of a blade being drawn. Reacting instantly, Ed drew his own weapon in self-defense, while Ayla screamed in terror. Just then, the office door burst open. Professor Glast stepped inside, and Ed, stunned, called out his name. Ayla immediately rushed toward the professor, pleading for help and accusing Ed of holding a dagger. Professor Glast's eyes flashed with a menacing purple light as he surveyed the situation. Immediately, Professor Glast unleashed a surging torrent of purple magical power. He activated the celestial magic, a complex circle radiating a blinding light. Using the time prison spell, he rendered Isla completely immobile in midair. Right after, Glast cast another magic circle aimed directly at Ed. The dagger in Ed's hand was stripped away by the magical force, flying up into the air. Without hesitation, Ed called the spirit Mug's name, and a brilliant yellow light flashed. Ed's eyes shone with determination just before a fierce explosion erupted. He successfully lunged and dodged, narrowly escaping the blast. As he landed, Ed conceded that the professor's reaction was indeed very fast. Glast showed interest, commenting that Ed's speed was unnaturally fast and suspecting he had read all of his research. Ed cleverly denied it, claiming that Isla's sensitivity to celestial magic had helped him, then asked if Glast truly needed to stop him. Glast replied cryptically, stating that he acted for his own purposes and hoped Ed wouldn't judge him too harshly. Ed sighed inwardly, annoyed by the professor's vague explanation. He narrowed his eyes, pondering Glast's cryptic remark. Ed realized that escaping now would only complicate things further, as Glast would surely hunt him down. He envisioned the scenario of being captured with Isla and locked in the secret laboratory, pushing the plot straight to the final phase. After some consideration, Ed came to a bold decision. He would allow Glast to capture him. Glast's eyes flashed purple, seemingly sensing the change in Ed's demeanor. As Ed stood up straight, Glast asked if he had decided to fight or had devised some kind of plan. Glast reached out to cast a spell, reassuring Ed that this wouldn't be too bad for him. Immediately, the time prison spell was activated, freezing Ed within a block of pink energy. A paper detailing Ed's academic achievements suddenly appeared, signaling a flashback. From above, Glast looked down at the immobilized Ed, the name Ed Rothstaler echoing in his mind. In the past, someone had expressed astonishment that Ed could continuously improve his grades while living under harsh conditions. Assistant Professor Cleo pointed out that Glast's view of Ed had changed, but he replied that he hadn't known about the boy's achievements then. Glast continued to muse, admitting that Ed possessed an unusually sharp combat instinct. However, he judged that Ed's methods were the fighting style of the weak. Tactics based on thorough analysis and utilizing everything available were the result of diligence, not innate talent. Ed's look of absolute confidence reminded Glast of what he had lost in the past. Memories of his talented daughter, Muri, who had vowed to make her father proud, suddenly flooded back. Haunted by the painful memory, Glast sank into contemplation. Taking advantage of that moment of distraction, Ed's fire spirit Mug quietly slipped out of his cloak. It transformed into a brilliant streak of light, soaring into the sky like an emergency signal. The light shot away at breakneck speed, crossing the sky and the hills. It headed straight for a small wooden house hidden deep within the forest. Inside the house, Yennecar was carefully tasting hot soup. She smiled as she stirred the bubbling pot of soup over the fire, thinking to herself that Ed was running a little late. Elsewhere, an unnamed archmage was writing the final lines in his diary, feeling ashamed of his title after realizing the vastness of magic, and remembering his teacher, Sylvania, who had died young. In a distant memory, Archmage Glocht read a book, while little Lucy slept peacefully in his lap, musing that longing for the past was inevitable when living a long life. He admitted that the pain of loss sometimes paralyzed his reason, making him yearn to break the laws of nature just to see the great sage Sylvania again. But what was lost could not be recovered, and Glocht knew that those who remained, like Lucy, had to become stronger. He gently placed his hand on her head, silently wishing she would grow up strong and steady. On his deathbed, Glocht took his last breath, dedicating the final words of his book to Lucy, who had become his ultimate purpose in life. Lucy sobbed uncontrollably, clutching the chronicles of magic discovery left behind by her teacher, Glocht. Returning to the present, Lucy lay on a rooftop, idly thinking about her deceased teacher, who had calmly accepted his approaching death. She recalled how she had to let him go, and wondered if the scar in her heart would ever fade. To momentarily forget her sorrow, Lucy smiled and pulled out her small comfort, a bag of dried jerky. Shaking the bag, she was surprised to find it completely empty. Lucy's purple eyes flashed as she sensed an unexpected presence nearby. Down below, while Yennecar was engrossed in cooking by the fire, Ed's elemental spirit, Mug, suddenly zipped toward the surface. Mug quickly reached Lucy and whispered an urgent message into her ear, causing a surge of dark mana to momentarily envelop her. Lucy was utterly bewildered by the message she had just received. Meanwhile, in the magnificent Trix Hall, a secret ceremony to transfer ownership of a sealed tome was taking place. Only the highest-ranking figures from the buyer, the seller, the Elte Company, and the Academy were permitted to attend. Lortel Cahelland, acting as the vice director of the Elta Company, wore a calculating smile. Across from her stood the principal of Sylvania Academy, Obel Forsyth, his expression stern and solemn. Lortel secretly compared the principal to another man she knew, noting that while their appearances were similar, their fundamental natures were vastly different. The face of Kreppen Rothstaler flashed through Lortel's mind. She recalled that following the negotiations for the sealed tome, he had approached her and demanded she hand it over. Although she had intended to comply, she still needed to demand substantial compensation to cover the lie she had told Princess Pinia. Lortel confidently demanded a price of 12,000 gold, a figure she considered utterly absurd. Yet, Kreppen agreed instantly, without the slightest hesitation. He even revealed shocking intelligence. Elta had hired mercenaries who were currently en route to Sylvania. Although Kreppen's arrogant demeanor irritated Lortel, she dismissed it, recognizing that the information he provided was invaluable. Back in the present, Principal Obel Forsyth officially relinquished ownership of the book, inviting Lortel, as the Elta Company representative, to step forward. As Lortel placed her hand on the tome, she realized that profit was not the most crucial element. What she truly gained was a priceless favor from Ed, and that realization brought a triumphant smile to her face. Suddenly, a torrent of purple dark energy surged through the air. The entire hall violently shook from a magical explosion, sending everyone reeling. From the epicenter, shadow assassins with terrifying, glowing eyes began to materialize. They immediately lunged at Principal Obel, and Lortel realized in horror that their true target was the sealed tome. Amidst the pandemonium, a hand shrouded in dark magic snatched the tome. Lortel was stunned when the attacker was revealed to be none other than Professor Glast. Glast vanished with the book in a flash of magic, leaving behind a stunned silence. Stunned and disappointed, Lortel realized that her precious favor from Ed had just gone up in smoke. Meanwhile, in the secret laboratory, an angry voice echoed, calling out Ed Rothstaler's name. Inside a dark holding cell, Isla cowered in fear as she faced Ed Rothstaler. Ed, though inwardly troubled by the news that Professor Glast had stolen the sealed tome, coldly ordered Ayla to remain silent. A large man appeared, warning them that their screams could awaken the colossal monster caged nearby. The man introduced himself as Coom, a magic researcher, and revealed that Professor Glast had specifically ordered that Isla not be experimented on, as she was a necessary asset. Coom remarked that Ed was calmer than he had anticipated, to which Ed replied with indifference. After Coom left to review his notes, Ed calmly sat down, realizing he could do nothing but wait. He calculated silently. Once Taylor and his group arrived to cause a disturbance, the Soul Library would be destroyed. With no one left to obstruct him, he would then be able to collect all the replica artifact blueprints as planned. Ed glanced at Isla, feeling a slight twinge of guilt for being about to benefit without having to lift a finger. Reacting to his gaze, Ayla screamed hysterically, threatening to shout even louder if he approached her. She even threatened to bite off her own tongue, causing Ed to sigh and wearily assure her that he harbored no ill will toward her. Ed explained that if he had wanted to harm her, he would have seized the opportunity long ago, while internally admitting that he had a favorable impression of Isla from his time playing the game. Isla furiously called him a liar, but Ed simply told her to calm down and wait for Taylor to arrive and rescue her. Ayla's eyes widened in disbelief, and she challenged Ed, demanding to know what right he had to speak Taylor's name. She was confused and utterly bewildered by Ed's inexplicable attitude. Ed unexpectedly apologized for the events during the entrance exam, reminded her that he had helped her during the glass can incident, and advised her to trust Taylor. Isla was completely dumbfounded, unable to believe that Ed Rothstaler had just offered an apology. Ed let out a deep sigh, seemingly exhausted by the tense exchange. Suddenly, his elemental spirit, Mug, appeared in a halo of light, anxiously fluttering around and asking about his master's situation with a worried expression. Mug explained tearfully that it had taken a long time to find Ed, because his soul resonance was extremely faint. Ed gently stroked the spirit, praising it for a job well done, while Ayla gasped in astonishment upon recognizing the presence of an elemental spirit. Ayla expressed skepticism about Ed's ability to summon spirits, but he brushed her off, thinking that he finally had a familiar face to talk to. Recognizing an opportunity, Ayla suggested using the spirit to send a distress message to a professor who could communicate with elementals. Ed remained silent, calculating, unwilling to disrupt the story's flow, while Mug cheerfully reassured him not to worry. The tiny spirit revealed that it had taken half a day just to reach this location, meaning Ed had been captured for 2 days, a fact that greatly surprised him. Mug recalled the sight of Yennecar unleashing her wrath, describing the power as both beautiful and terrifying. It continued its report, stating that both a female merchant, Lortel, and the female mage, Lucy, had agreed to help, forming a formidable approaching force. With a radiant expression, Mug confidently asserted that Ed would soon be rescued and that they only needed to wait patiently. Contrary to Mug's expectation, Ed's face darkened. He trembled with rage and squeezed Mug tightly, leaving Isla utterly confused. Ed quickly leaned close to Mug's ear and whispered a set of urgent instructions. Immediately after, he tossed Mug away, beginning his new plan. Ed rushed to the bars, pounding them and shouting the name of the researcher Coom, declaring that he had changed his mind and needed to leave immediately. Coom approached, warning Ed that his noise would awaken the imprisoned monster nearby. Ed insisted that if they didn't release him, Coom's group would be the ones in trouble, but the jailer merely sneered, dismissing him as a frightened student. Losing interest, Coom told Ed to calm down, then turned and walked away. Isla confusedly asked why he was acting this way, but Ed simply signaled her to be silent. A cluster of keys jingled as they were carried away in the darkness. Mug flew back, handing Ed the retrieved keys and lavishing praise on his master's brilliant plan. Ed took the keys, thinking to himself that Mug's unauthorized summoning of help had complicated everything. He quickly unlocked the cell door, astonishing Ayla, who stood behind him. Isla was stunned, unable to comprehend what was happening. Ed coldly ordered Isla to be silent, and only answer with yes or no. He explained that the outside was too dangerous, then locked the door again and instructed Ayla to tell the kidnappers that he had escaped alone so she wouldn't be tortured. Seeing Isla's anxiety, Ed sighed, stating that her legs were too weak for an escape, and demanded she stop arguing. With a sharp gaze, he repeated his demand decisively. Ayla reluctantly accepted, bowing her head in agreement. Ed told her to stay put and wait, then decisively turned on his heel and left. He rushed down the dark corridor, determined to handle everything himself. Ed gritted his teeth, telling himself he could handle Yennecar and Lortel joining the fray. But he recalled Mug's report that the witch-hatted mage girl had also agreed to help an enemy even the most experienced players couldn't defeat. In Ed's mind, the image of Lucy Mayriel appeared amidst a storm of magic. An invincible girl. He remembered Bad Ending 27 involving Lucy, an event he had never paid attention to because it required very specific activation conditions. The prerequisite for activating that catastrophic ending was for Professor Glast and Lucy Mayriel to meet when the incident began. Ed smirked with determination, silently giving himself an order. At all costs, he had to rush to prevent that fateful encounter. Meanwhile, in another building, Taylor called out for Ziggs. Ziggs, who was shirtless and lifting weights, turned and asked Taylor what was wrong. Taylor, ragged and breathless, burst into the training room and urgently pleaded for Ziggs's help. With a determined expression, he gritted his teeth and asserted that they must rescue Isla. The context was clarified. After losing track of Professor Glast, Taylor sought out Ziggs to pursue the kidnapper who had taken Ayla and was hiding in the underground waterways. Meanwhile, Ed Rothstaler decided it was best to quietly retreat so as not to usurp the protagonist's role. Although he was familiar with the route of the final chapter of Act 2, going in reverse was still a new experience. He easily passed through the monster laboratory, since he was going the opposite direction. All the monsters, including a giant creature in a cage, were safely locked up under Coom's guard. Ed breathed a sigh of relief, knowing he had to act fast to prevent the confrontation between Lucy Mayriel and Professor Glast, an event that would surely lead to a bad ending. Cautiously peering around a corner, Ed realized the biggest problem blocking his path. It was Reyna, the guardian of the Soul Library, hovering in midair like a phantom. This entity was Reyna, a banshee and the librarian of the Soul Library. Hiding behind a desk, Ed observed Reyna's path, confident that he knew her patrol patterns and even how to defeat her if forced into combat. However, Ed knew that Reyna was a crucial milestone in Taylor's journey of growth. He realized that if Taylor didn't defeat Reyna himself to grow stronger, he would face immense difficulties with future enemies. Ed envisioned the sub-bosses Taylor had to face, including the resurrected demon of the sewers and Reyna, both of whom offered massive amounts of experience points. Therefore, on his way out, Ed decided he would only grab a few necessary magical tools and quietly slip away, starting with the lightning generator. While Reyna floated past, humming a tune, Ed crouched down, searching for the next item, the unidirectional light stream device. He cast a resolute glance forward, telling himself he would return here after everything was over. Ed couldn't help but regret leaving behind countless incredible magical artifacts glowing on the bookshelves. Mug flew over, reporting that Reyna would no longer be able to see the exit, allowing Ed to breathe a sigh of relief and prepare to leave. A sudden, massive explosion rang out, and Reyna's eyes widened in astonishment. The entire Soul Library shook violently from an earth-shattering blast. Ed Rothstaler was stunned, wondering if this was an earthquake that wasn't supposed to be in the game script. A massive bookshelf collapsed nearby, startling both Ed and Mug. Ed's eyes widened, sensing that something terrible was about to happen. From within the cloud of dust, the phantom Reyna floated into view, her stark white eyes staring intensely at him. Ed angrily gritted his teeth, realizing his escape plan had been completely ruined. The scene abruptly shifted back to 30 minutes before the devastating earthquake. Inside a luxurious room, an academy official screamed in terror as he was surrounded by shadow assassins. The shadowy entities, summoned by purple magic, mercilessly slammed the man onto the floor. A massive block of magical ice nearby suddenly cracked and shattered. From within, a figure broke free of the ice, thinking that if this transaction wasn't kept secret, Sylvania's reputation would be ruined. Lortel Cahellan stood firm amidst the wreckage, declaring that she would personally take responsibility and reclaim the stolen sealed tome. Amidst the chaos, she approached Principal Obel, who was tending to an injured official, and questioned him about Professor Glast's true intentions. Principal Obel calmly turned back and asked Lortel if she knew about the 3 types of forbidden magic. He explained that these acts distorted the laws of nature and challenged the boundaries of fate: the pursuit of immortality, the resurrection of the dead, and the reversal of time. Horrified upon realizing Glast's true intentions, Lortel loudly demanded to know if Obel was aware that Glast planned to use celestial magic for a resurrection. Obel revealed his mere curiosity, recounting Glast's lifelong reverence for the great sage Sylvania and his tragic obsession with his own daughter, Miori, a girl of mediocre talent who died after being pushed too hard by her father. The principal posed a loaded question. If Glast truly mastered the magic of resurrection, who would he choose to bring back from the dead? Lortel froze, cold sweat breaking out as the horrifying pieces of the truth began to click into place in her mind. The tense dialogue was abruptly cut short when a subordinate burst in, frantically delivering urgent news to Principal Obel. The man reported that Professor Glast had been spotted fleeing into the underground waterways, with Taylor in immediate pursuit. Another official added that, according to witnesses, Glast had not only stolen the sealed tome but also kidnapped the student Isla. The final victim was none other than Ed Rothstaler, a second-year magic student, causing Lortel to spin around in shock. Just then, a fierce roar and a violent tremor struck the area, confirming Lortel's stunned realization that Ed had indeed been kidnapped. She tried to reassure herself that Principal Obel, the greatest mage, would easily rescue Ed, but a deep sense of foreboding persisted. Unable to wait any longer, Lortel snatched the binoculars from the subordinate's hand, her face set with determination. Through the binoculars, she confirmed that the source and direction of the tremor were both emanating from the entrance to the underground waterways. The scene revealed a colossal fire dragon spirit roaring and unleashing a destructive torrent of fire, and the person riding upon its back was none other than Yennecar Palarover, leaving Lortel utterly dumbfounded. With her face obscured by shadow, Lortel firmly declared to the bewildered subordinate that she would be joining the pursuit. She stepped forward decisively, without a moment of hesitation. Lortel pulled up her hood, resolving that if the principal was not going to intervene immediately, she would have to retrieve the sealed tome herself. She issued orders to her entourage, instructing them to leave only a few men for negotiations while the rest were to follow her lead. Meanwhile, at the entrance to the underground waterways, an elite third-year alchemy student named Dorothy was standing guard. Once a mediocre student, she was indebted to Professor Glast for recognizing her talent and viewed him as a savior. Driven by absolute loyalty, Dorothy was prepared to trust him, even after he stole the book and kidnapped students. She was determined to keep her promise and guard the entrance to the underground waterways for him at all costs. However, faced with the terrifying power being unleashed, Dorothy collapsed to the ground, trembling as she realized things had gone too far. Before the trembling Dorothy, the fire dragon spirit let out an earth-shattering roar. From its back, Yennecar issued a cold command, "Answer me." Her eyes blazing with deadly red light, she ground out each word. "Where is Ed?" Overwhelmed by the terrifying pressure, Dorothy foamed at the mouth and collapsed. After landing in the waterway tunnel, Yennecar and her spirits struggled to navigate, muttering about the confusing directions. While Dorothy lay unconscious on the ground, Yennecar wrung her hands in frustration, unable to recall the complex sequence of left and right turns. She suddenly realized the person she had just subdued was Dorothy, the third-year alchemy valedictorian, and briefly wondered if she had gone too far. Feeling guilty, Yennecar moved to cover Dorothy with her cloak, but an inner voice seemed to scold her actions. Just then, Lortel and her entourage emerged from the shadows, interrupting Yennecar's moment of hesitation. Lortel stared intently at Yennecar, a tear rolling down her cheek as she recognized her rival. Deep down, Lortel conceded that Yennecar was one of the strongest combatants, someone willing to flatten the entire area just to save Ed. Her imagination immediately conjured a scene of Yennecar finding Ed and embracing him in blissful happiness. In Lortel's jealous fantasy, Ed blushed and returned Yennekar's affection, telling her she was the most wonderful person. The delusion escalated further as Ed proposed to Yennekar, discussing their future together. Snapping back to reality, Lortel screamed in despair, her usual cold rationality dissolving completely at the thought of Ed. Regaining her composure, she approached Yennekar and whispered a lie, that Ed had already been rescued but was severely injured and waiting for her at the campsite. Lortel told herself that she was destined to be Ed's rescuer, and thus, she had to eliminate Yennekar from the competition. However, Yennekar was not fooled. Her eyes flashed with suspicion as she asked why Lortel would share that information, causing Lortel to flinch. With the sharp intellect that only surfaced when Ed was concerned, Yennekar pointed out that she was the first to arrive, questioning how anyone could have possibly bypassed her to rescue Ed beforehand. Cornered, Lortel offered a strained laugh and admitted she might have been mistaken, while Yennekar impatiently pressed her about using her staff to rescue Ed. Lortel silently conceded that she could not refute Yennekar's accusation, and the undeniable truth was that Ed was in danger. Yennekar explained that she, too, was acting alone, as Lucy had merely yawned and wandered off when asked for assistance. Realizing they were both without aid, Lortel and Yennekar faced each other with fiery gazes, initiating a silent competition. Lortel silently decided this was no time to obstruct one another, then ordered her entourage to stand by. Without further discussion, Yennekar declared she would search the eastern sector, and Lortel agreed to take the remaining area. Once Yennekar was out of sight, Lortel watched her go with a determined expression. Her mind focused solely on the goal of rescuing Ed. With a decisive thought, Lortel dashed away at maximum speed. In the other direction, Yennekar also unleashed her speed, proving equally fast. Both shared the same burning thought. Ed must be saved. And both were equally determined. They must be the one to do it first. Meanwhile, Ed and his spirit Mug suddenly faced a colossal blue phantom that had just smashed through the ceiling and descended upon them. Ed fearfully wondered if this was an earthquake, while Mug shrieked in terror at the sudden appearance. The stone floor beneath Ed cracked open, shattered by a terrifying surge of magical energy. A devastating explosion engulfed the entire room, violently throwing Ed and Mug backward. Held back by a hand, Ed gloomily thought that he would rather face a real earthquake than this. The phantom Reyna was subdued, while Lucy Mayriel stretched languidly after her intervention. Amidst the rubble, Lucy casually sat down, while the phantom Reyna lay motionless on the floor. Lucy picked her nose and nonchalantly told Ed that she had only come to save him because she was bored, ending the fight before it could even begin. On the balcony overlooking the academy at dawn, Principal Abel stood silently beside an unconscious official. The principal calmly informed another gray-haired official that, despite the danger, this was a prime opportunity for the students to mature, like flowers blooming on a withered branch. The gray-haired official anxiously questioned the necessity of the situation, given that Sylvania Academy was currently enjoying an unprecedented golden age. Proof of this was evident in Taylor and Clevius, current students who surpassed the strength of any previous generation. Countless rising stars like Elvira Aniston emerged, so numerous they were likened to a star-filled night sky. Principal Obel crushed the leaf in his hand, sensing that this was a warning sign. He concluded that the coming trials were so monumental that only a generation of such talent could hope to conquer them. Meanwhile, at Ed Rothsayler's wooden cabin in the quiet forest, a shocking event was about to unfold. A perfectly circular, pitch-black void suddenly appeared on the wall of the cabin. It was a massive tunnel created by magic, piercing straight through the mountain. Up close, the mouth of the black hole seemed to devour everything surrounding it. The destructive magical current continued to rush through the dark space. Its journey concluded by shattering the ceiling of the secret laboratory, causing a rain of debris. Amidst the rubble, the phantom Reyna lay dissolving on the floor. Ed Rothstaler sighed, covering his face, utterly exhausted by the chaos caused by his recent savior. Lucy Mayriel looked up at him with sparkling eyes, innocently asking if he had any jerky left. Disappointed by his silence, Lucy pouted and floated away, declaring she would find another place to sleep. Instantly, a hand seized her shoulder. Ed firmly held the powerful mage in place. Ed suddenly realized the situation had devolved into utter chaos. He surmised that both Yennekar and Lortel had entered the underground waterways, and he needed to stop them. He quickly calculated, trusting that Taylor could handle the sub-bosses alone, and that bypassing the now-defeated Reyna wouldn't derail the overall scenario. Ed realized the biggest immediate problem was Lucy. He feared that if she encountered Glast, the situation would spiral into a catastrophic bad ending. He decided he must keep Lucy close and demanded that she not leave, prompting her to ask the reason in surprise. Sweating profusely from the stress, Ed struggled to find a plausible excuse. He awkwardly offered the excuse that sometimes, the best thing to do is simply remain beside someone without speaking. Ed continued to plead, explaining that having Lucy nearby made him feel secure due to her immense strength, but she remained focused only on the question of jerky. Losing his patience, Ed yelled, demanding she forget the jerky and stay with him until they exited the underground waterways. Lucy suggested they could use magic to escape instantly, but Ed, his worries about Lortel and Yennecar clear, insisted he still had business to attend to here. After a brief moment of contemplation, Lucy sighed and reluctantly agreed. However, she stated that she had a request in return and raised her hand. Immediately afterward, Ed began sprinting, carrying Lucy on his back, resolving to escape via an alternate route. He was determined to retrieve the necessary items from the library, locate Yennecar and Lortel, and then leave this place. While running, Lucy once again asked about the jerky, and Ed could only sigh helplessly, replying that he had none. Suddenly, countless pairs of glowing red eyes illuminated the darkness ahead. A swarm of monstrous bats roared and lunged toward them. Ed didn't hesitate, extending his hand as a fiery magic circle appeared while he chanted the ignite spell. A sea of fire engulfed the corridor, incinerating the bats, and granting Ed experience points along with an increase in magical proficiency. Ed sighed in relief, musing on the benefits of mass monster extermination for rapid leveling. He continued charging forward through the flames, burning more bats, and silently apologizing to Taylor for preemptively farming some experience. Meanwhile, in another location, a surge of magical energy spread, revealing the presence of concealment magic. That was Lortel, who was utilizing her unique magical power resonance ability for rapid movement, a talent even Professor Glast had to acknowledge. With a determined gaze, Lortel told herself that this was no time for pleasantries. Just then, a sudden realization flashed through her mind. Clenching her cloak, Lortel realized she was genuinely trying to help someone with all her heart. Her heart fluttered again, sensing she was about to grasp a relationship unbound by monetary ties. The familiar feeling from before rushed back, and Lortel heard a sound growing steadily closer. Her heartbeat pounded wildly in her chest. Driven by this intense emotion, Lortel shattered the stone wall directly ahead. Amidst the dust and smoke, she was stunned to hear Ed's familiar voice greeting her. Ed sighed in relief upon seeing her. He smiled, clutching a pile of loot, and casually announced that he had just been kidnapped. Ed handed Lortel a stack of scrolls, saying he needed help carrying them, stunning her when she realized they were all high-grade crafting formulas. Shaking her head vigorously, Lortel pushed aside the business talk and anxiously inquired about his safety. Ed admitted he had been in danger, but then he turned his back to her. He stated that everything was fine, revealing Lucy sound asleep on his back, which left Lortel utterly speechless. Lortel's expression darkened. She couldn't believe her eyes and wondered why Ed would act this way. She bitterly reflected that she had bravely taken a step forward in their relationship, unlike the timid Yennecar. Lortel recalled that night when she had been so flustered she nearly burned down the entire forest. She wondered how Ed could calmly carry another girl right in front of her while simultaneously discussing business matters so casually. Just as she was about to speak up to regain the initiative, Lortel froze. Ed suddenly leaned down, close to her face, and sincerely told her that she was the only person he could truly trust. Deep down, Lortel screamed that Ed had gone too far by daring to demand so much from her. Yet, his sincere words that she was the only one he could trust still echoed, making her heart pound erratically. All her anger vanished. Lortel blushed, stammering to ask if he needed an invoice, then internally chastised herself for being so easily swayed. Ed called her name loudly, pulling Lortel out of her hazy thoughts while Lucy was still sound asleep on his back. Just then, an elderly staff member rushed over frantically, panting as he reported that something terrible had just happened. The scene shifted to a dark, damp underground corridor, where only the sound of footsteps echoed. A group of students led by Taylor and Ziggs advanced cautiously, with Ziggs reminding everyone not to drop their guard. Clevius Nortondale, the top student of the combat department, trembled with fear, stammering to ask if they really needed to go deeper and suggesting they should leave. Elvira Aniston, the top student of the alchemy department, angrily yelled at Clevius for his cowardice, but then grumbled about why they had to save Ed Rothstaler as well. Taylor looked earnestly at Clevius, asserting that he truly wanted to save Ayla and pleading for everyone's help. Ziggs placed a hand on Clevius' shoulder, firmly stating that Ayla was a good person and they couldn't give up after coming this far. Suddenly, a gentle voice rang out, and a delicate hand was raised with elegance. A blonde girl introduced herself as the prophet Adele, smiling and saying she sensed something ahead. With a confident smile, Adele warned that their upcoming opponent would not be easy to deal with, and her prophecies were usually very accurate. Her finger pointed toward two dark passages at the end of the corridor. Immediately, a piercing scream rang out, along with a fierce explosion emanating from the direction she had indicated. Amidst the flames, a girl wearing glasses thrashed in panic, screaming that this wasn't the plan and she was only acting on instinct. The clumsy girl collapsed onto the ground, unconscious, while Adele muttered calculations, seemingly realizing she had guessed the wrong path. Taylor suddenly realized something. From the darkness, another elementalist, calm and powerful, stepped out with her mighty spirits, politely greeting the group while the previous attacker lay motionless at her feet. Taylor's group froze, as terrifying memories of Yennecar flooded back, memories they could not forget. The fear she had once instilled in them still lingered, for when reason is paralyzed, misunderstandings arise. Although unsure if he could win, Taylor was determined to give it his all. Yennecar wondered why they were looking at her that way, worried that she had been too rough with Assistant Professor Cleo, even though she believed the woman had simply fainted. Isla quickly held Taylor back, but he shrugged her off, insisting that he had to fight to save her. Amidst the tension, a voice rang out, demanding that everyone stop. Ed Rothstaler calmly walked down the stairs, positioning himself between the two opposing groups. The entire assault team called out Ed Rothstaler's name in astonishment. Carried on Ed's back, Lucy woke up, anxiously asking if he was injured. Taylor and Elvira glared at Ed, their hostility evident. Taylor thought to himself that he and Elvira understood exactly what kind of opponent Ed was. He recalled that even using only basic magic, and being an amateur archer, Ed could single-handedly hold off 3 stronger enemies. But now, Ed had formidable allies beside him, with a gigantic fire dragon spirit vaguely visible behind them. Taylor realized he had grown much stronger. But when Ed Rothstaler entered the fray, his chances of victory returned to 0. Ed gently placed a hand on the stunned Taylor's shoulder. He told Taylor to go, because Isla was waiting, and his mission was to defeat Glast. Taylor's team stood ready to execute their mission. Ed thought to himself that while Taylor dealt with the final boss, he and the others would handle the rest. Ed, standing in the shadows, was determined to handle the unexpected variable himself. Professor Glast shared the same objective. He had to take down Elta. Ed knew that Lortel had anticipated Elta's counterattack, but the seasoned magnate Elta exploited Lortel's weakness, ordering his subordinates to follow him and leaving only a few behind for the negotiation. An informant happily announced that thanks to the company employees trapped in the sewers, he had managed to obtain countless production formulas and magical engineering tools. That person believed these things were useful. But the best tool for survival in this world was something else entirely. Ed calculated that LT was the mid-boss of Act 2, and he had to be eliminated according to the original scenario. With iron resolve, Ed called Ziggs's name to assign a task. He instructed Ziggs that the path ahead was mostly clear, and to ask Ayla for details after rescuing her. Ed then turned to Taylor, startling the young man. Ed knew that ultimately, Taylor was the one who had to follow the storyline, unlock his skills, and train diligently, as only he held the hope of defeating the final boss. Taylor would have to face countless challenges, including the magic towers that Glast would summon to bombard him with terrifying spells. Taylor was speechless before the heavy responsibility entrusted to him. He could only utter a single phrase of good luck, but Ed thought to himself that such empty encouragement was unnecessary. Ed watched the backs of Taylor and his group as they rushed into the tunnel, placing his trust in the protagonist's role. While Taylor's group ran through the underground waterways, Ed deduced that Glast targeted the company to find evidence of failed insider trading, then decided he would head to the main academic district first to report the situation. Yennecar suddenly held Ed back, not wanting him to proceed. She gritted her teeth, refusing to accept that Ed was about to rush into danger yet again. Yennecar screamed, trying to stop Ed, afraid that he would be injured once more. Lortel also appeared, anxiously asking if Ed truly intended to confront the Golden King Elta, especially since he had only just escaped kidnapping and imprisonment. With tearful eyes, Yennecar reiterated that Ed had just collapsed from overwork, and the company matter had nothing to do with him. She simply didn't want him to be hurt further. Ed silently admitted Yennecar was right, but he couldn't reveal the true reason. He needed to take down an unpredictable threat like Elta to ensure their safety. Fortunately, he believed Lortel would need both him and Yennecar to defeat Elta, so she would surely find some pretext for both of them to participate. Ed's gaze sharpened. He looked directly at Yennecar and agreed with her, albeit cryptically. Lortel took Yennecar's hand, agreeing that dragging Ed into this was selfish, and that he truly needed to rest in a safe place. Yennecar nodded in agreement, while Ed was secretly pleased that the two girls were getting along. However, Ed couldn't accept resting in the middle of such a critical situation, so he thanked them for their concern. He firmly declared that he couldn't claim this wasn't his business, stunning both Lortel and Yennecar. Yennecar, her eyes blazing red with confusion, questioned Ed, while Lortel secretly thought that this was indeed his business now. The bearded informant urged the group to move quickly, as time was running out. While running, Ed tried to devise a plausible explanation, and the informant chimed in, agreeing that this was definitely Ed's problem. Yennecar suddenly realized the truth, deducing that since Ed had a contract with Lortel, if Lortel lost her position, he wouldn't be able to purchase the necessary magical artifacts. Ed fell silent for a moment, surprised by Yennecar's quick thinking. He confirmed that was the reason, causing Yennecar to look smug, while Lortel secretly thought that Ed's business was also her business. Having resolved the misunderstanding, Ed refocused, his expression serious as he looked ahead. The group arrived at a collapsed area, where a massive pile of rubble blocked the path, prompting the informant to exclaim that someone had gone too far. The informant recognized Assistant Professor Cleo lying unconscious on the ground, astonished that Taylor would be so ruthless even toward an upperclassman. Yennecar slid to Cleo's side, while Ed realized the culprit wasn't Taylor, but the person currently accompanying him. The informant frantically protested that he hadn't meant to, claiming it was just a chain reaction, while Lortel and Yennecar circled him, mocking his callousness. Lortel ordered everyone to keep moving outside before talking further, as they needed to reach the academic district for help, and a carriage was waiting. In the middle of the night, a shattered wooden carriage lay submerged beneath the cold water. On the water's surface, 3 black-clad henchmen corpses floated in deadly silence. Lortel Cahelland smirked, coldly stating that the enemy had arrived faster than expected, while Ed, Yennecar, and the informant stood behind her with tense expressions. From the bank, an imposing figure appeared. Elte Cahelland, the man Lortel called father. Elte looked directly at his daughter, asserting that although he couldn't find any evidence at the company, he knew what she had done. He revealed that a small threat was enough for the cowardly informant to disclose Lortel's location in the underground waterways. Facing the perilous situation, Lortel maintained her composed smile, a skill she had honed for a very long time. Elte snapped his fingers, declaring that torture would be a waste on her, and a confession was what he truly desired. Suddenly, the eyes of the dead henchman beneath the water flashed with an eerie red light. A streak of white light tore through the air, signaling a swift counterattack. Taylor, his hair now white, swung his sword, generating a surge of blue energy that blocked the charging undead. The sound of clashing metal rang out sharply as Taylor's blade intercepted the enemy's attack. Lortel quickly chanted, creating a defensive magic circle, while Taylor bravely stood guard in front of her. She angrily questioned her father as to why he dared to bring mercenaries into the academy again. More henchmen with glowing red eyes slowly emerged from the water, and Lortel warned that this time, things would be very different. From the shadows, hooded archers drew their bows, ready to fire. A formidable mercenary army, praised by Elte as the strongest on the continent, had completely surrounded the students. Elte Cahelland raised his hand to give the order, declaring that as long as Lortel survived, everyone else could be eliminated. Following the command, the archers simultaneously fired deadly blue energy arrows. From a distance, Yennecar and Lucy, who had just woken up, watched in horror as the rain of arrows poured down onto the battlefield. Amidst the magical arrow barrage, Yennecar quickly created a green energy shield to protect Ed, who was carrying Lucy on his back. A sharp arrow flew straight toward Ed at terrifying speed. Yennecar's bird-shaped magic shield firmly blocked and shattered the arrows, ensuring their safety. Ed realized it was an extremely effective defensive magic. Not only using spells, Yennecar also delivered powerful kicks to deflect the incoming arrows. She turned to warn Ed that the enemy's attack was highly tactical. Ed glanced over his shoulder, both thanking Yennecar and feeling slightly surprised by her strength. From afar, Elte Cahelland looked annoyed, finding elementalist users truly bothersome. However, he confidently declared that this time would be different, as he held up an ancient magic scroll. The scroll glowed, revealing itself to be the legendary grade artifact, the Velarus Prejudice, capable of neutralizing all mana in the area for 10 minutes. Ed's eyes widened in horror. He recognized it as an extremely expensive, single-use magic scroll. He mentally compared it to a stronger version of the Nightmoth reagent that Elvira had once used to restrict mana flow. Ed assessed the situation as extremely critical. Even though the scroll needed time to activate, they couldn't possibly break through the veteran mercenaries to stop Elte. And the worst part was that everyone in his group was a magic user. Lortel screamed in despair. She knew her father had prepared thoroughly, and if the scroll activated, it would all be over. She flew into the air, furiously questioning Elte about the consequences of daring to attack the academy. Elte merely sneered, replying that this was still better than losing his life. Ed mused, realizing that his very existence, that of a third-rate villain, had caused a butterfly effect that altered the entire storyline. He knew that Elta, a mid-game boss, would cause untold disaster for this world if left unchecked, and recalled that Elta was the one who had killed Lortel's parents in the past. Ed concluded that Elta was an undeniable villain, willing to do anything for his own glory and wealth. Ed thought to himself that while he couldn't blame Elta, whose actions were driven by survival, he still couldn't stand idly by. Amidst the chaotic battlefield, where students were fighting back against Elta's henchmen using frost magic, Ed made a firm decision. He told himself that he wouldn't lie about needing to compensate for the changes in the storyline that he himself had caused, no matter how selfish that might be. With a determined gaze, Ed asserted that this was his story, and it was time to awaken someone. He gently knelt down onto the damp ground. He then called out to Lucy, who was dozing on his back, and she began to wake up with a long yawn. Still groggy, Lucy grumbled that it was too noisy around them. Suddenly, her eyes snapped open, flashing with an eerie, magical purple light. A massive surge of purple magical energy exploded from Lucy's body. The terrifying wave of power sent all of Elta's henchmen flying away. Amidst the vortex of magical power, the previously sluggish Lucy was fully awake, her eyes shining terrifyingly. In a flashback, Archmage Glock's final book was revealed to have been written in a humble little hut. There, Glock taught his young apprentice Lucy that innate talent was no reason to stop learning, and that she must always remain humble and use her power for others. He also warned her about the inevitable solitude that comes with overwhelming power, then gently tapped her forehead to get her attention. Lucy looked up at her master with a curious gaze as he asked her to promise 3 things. With a gentle smile, Glock gave the first promise. She must not kill, and even by mistake, she must avoid staining her small hands with blood. Back in reality, Lucy stood there, enveloped in a terrifying magical aura. One of Elta's mercenaries, a seasoned veteran, swallowed hard in terror. The deadly purple light reflected in his trembling eyes, a testament to his combat skill and experience, screaming a warning. The sword in the mercenary's hand began to vibrate violently, as his survival instinct told him that an absolute danger was right before him. The senses of the experienced mercenaries were screaming an unprecedented level of alarm. Crushed by Lucy's magical pressure, the mercenaries could only stand still, unable to move. The leader roared angrily, ordering his subordinates to move. However, the younger mercenaries, lacking that survival instinct, could only stammer that they didn't understand what kind of magic this was. Despite the fear, one young mercenary recklessly charged toward Lucy. Lucy observed him coldly, as she didn't typically use magic in the conventional sense. She simply flicked her finger. An invisible impact force struck the charging mercenary directly. It was not an incantation, but a pure physical force generated by compressing a massive amount of magical power. A purple energy explosion swept through, demonstrating absolute, violent power. Meanwhile, the leader was struggling with a magic scroll, wondering how much longer the incantation would take to activate. Lucy's gaze shifted to him, identifying him as the ringleader. She decided she would capture him first. The leader immediately felt a terrifying pressure crushing him. Just then, a gentle hand was placed on Lucy's shoulder, stopping her. Ed Rothstaler had intervened, and the leader collapsed to the ground as the pressure vanished. Ed calmly told Lucy that it was enough. Suddenly, Ed felt a violent tremor, but it wasn't an earthquake. The night sky above the academy shook violently with massive purple lightning bolts. It was the night the 7 great stars aligned and became clearly visible in the sky. Professor Glast's high-level celestial magic, capable of distorting reality, began to manifest. The major event, known as the Descent of the Demon Realm, had officially begun. Ed Rothstaler looked up at the brightly glowing magic towers, realizing this was the final battlefield of Act 2. He thought to himself that the timing was perfect. Ed believed that by now, Taylor had defeated the underground sewer monster and acquired the necessary skill. With his full party by his side, Ed was certain that Taylor would be able to stop Glast. The fact that the event was unfolding exactly as in the original work made him believe the storyline was still on the right track. However, this type of magic was too strange. Even Yennecar and Lortel couldn't understand what was happening. Suddenly, a voice from above explained that the towers were absorbing celestial magic. It was Lucy, floating in the air, who realized that under these conditions, something seemingly impossible could be accomplished. She came to a shocking conclusion: the resurrection of the dead. Ed recalled the ending of Act 2 in the game. According to the original scenario, Lucy was supposed to be sleeping on the roof of the Trix building and only wake up after everything was over. But if the player woke her up early, Professor Glast, when cornered, would make an offer. Instead of resurrecting the great sage Sylvania, he would offer to resurrect Lucy's master, Archmage Glocked. This led to bad ending #27, where the entire party was wiped out and Lucy vanished. Ed knew well that Lucy Mayriel was an insurmountable obstacle in Act 2 of the game. He contemplated that the unexpected variables not present in the original work could be resolved through his own efforts. But then another thought flashed through his mind. Ed suddenly realized that these very unexpected elements might be the key to reversing the predetermined bad endings. An ancient jar emits a purple aura, activating its ability to suppress all magic in the area for the next 10 minutes. Under the magical light, Elta Cahelland launched his attack, believing Ed Rothstaler and Lucy Mayriel were completely neutralized. Elte roared, ordering his henchmen to act immediately. A hooded mercenary charged forward, confident that his opponent would be unable to resist. He swung his sword, boldly declaring that Ed would be unable to use magic. However, Ed remained completely calm, softly chanting the incantation for the wind blade. The mercenary was instantly thrown high into the air by a powerful gust of wind. Ed stood there, realizing he was also an unexpected factor, but knowing he couldn't stop everything. Witnessing the impossible sight, Elta Cahelland cried out in horror, unable to understand why magic could still be used. He couldn't believe how Ed managed to conjure a spell right inside the Forbidden Zone. The power of a legendary artifact had its limits, and the jar began to crack under Lucy's terrifying magical pressure. Like trying to empty the ocean, Lucy's boundless mana was something the jar simply could not suppress. As the jar shattered, Lucy declared that she would clear the path herself. The young girl's eyes flared with brilliant purple light, asserting that nothing could impede her steps. With his extensive combat experience, Elta collapsed to his knees before Lucy's overwhelming power. The senses honed through countless battles screamed a terrifying truth to Elta. As Lucy hovered in the air, looking down at him with deadly eyes, Elta's instinct told him he was about to die. Suddenly, a hand blocked the surge of energy, and a voice rang out, asking Elta if he realized his predicament. Elta realized in terror that his life now completely depended on someone else's decision. Ed intervened, telling Lucy that if she didn't want to kill anyone, she should stop, which surprised her as she thought he was worried about Elte. Deep down, Lucy recalled her master's teaching, never let her hands be stained with blood. But the person Ed was truly worried about was not the man about to die, but the memory of Lucy as an innocent child sleeping peacefully beside her master. With a resolute gaze, Ed looked directly at Lucy. His concern was entirely for her. Lucy remained silent, merely raising her hand in a gesture, seemingly casting a spell. After a moment, she turned away and agreed. All right. As Lucy began to leave, Ed asked where she was going, and she simply replied that everything was over. She paused, glanced over her shoulder, and asked if he was sure he wouldn't regret it, though she didn't wait for an answer. Without waiting for Ed to reply, Lucy gently floated up into the air. Ed silently watched her go, his face clearly showing worry as she departed. Lucy lowered her head, her face hidden in the shadow of her hood, concealing her emotions. Memories flooded back. The image of young Lucy standing beside the sickbed of Archmage Glocked, her dying master, who urged those remaining to become stronger. His voice echoed, desperately pleading for her to be strong. He dedicated the final lines of his cherished book to her, who had become his last purpose in life. With a satisfied smile, Glock took his last breath after calling Lucy's name. Returning to reality, determination flashed in Lucy's eyes. She firmly said, no, rejecting the path she had nearly chosen. A brilliant purple magical light erupted, and Lucy vanished into the night sky, leaving Ed alone. Elsewhere, a silver-haired woman reported that all 57 people had safely boarded the evacuation ship off the island, and expressed hope for Yennekar's swift return. Meanwhile, Ed gasped for breath as he ran across the campus, deciding to postpone dealing with the captured Elte until later. Ed trusted that the Elta company would monitor Elta Cahelland, and Lortel would handle everything necessary, since she was the one connected to him. Ed panted from exhaustion, telling himself that sprinting at full speed to the highest point of the island had made his body feel heavy. He had reached Trix Hall, the place he called the starting point of this story arc. This was where Professor Glast had stolen the sage's sealed tome, and also where Taylor began his journey. Ed climbed the stairs, passing medical staff tending to the injured, and he never thought he would return here. But ultimately, his reverse journey had brought him back to the starting point. He thought that this was where Taylor began, and also where he would end his own journey. And there, Lucy was standing alone, quietly looking out at the glowing spires under the moonlight. Ed walked forward, reflecting on the legacy of Archmage Glocked, who had used his fortune to establish scholarships and construct buildings for the academy. Glockt's presence was everywhere, and Ed knew it well. Therefore, finding Lucy was not difficult. He knew for certain she would be here. He found her at the spot overlooking the entire academy. Because for Lucy, Sylvania Academy was a memento left behind by Glocked. Ed approached, breaking the silence with a greeting, and Lucy replied. He asked if she still had any jerky, but the answer was still no, disappointing Ed because their conversations always repeated this pattern. Lucy asked what he was doing here, and Ed replied that he was reminiscing. Ed nervously looked down at the deadly height, while Lucy began to say that she once had a very sad memory, but now she no longer felt distressed. Ed curiously asked why. Lucy explained that there was no specific reason. She simply concluded that it was because too much time had passed. Lucy recalled the serene image